Welcome back, friends, and welcome to the April edition of Carl Otto's Dark Anthology Monthly. Each month I gather my darkest stories, the ones that haunt the edges of sleep, the ones that leave something behind. This is where they live, bound together, told as one long ritual. But this month, we've added something new, the Quickfire Challenge. Stories written under pressure, written fast, from your comments, your prompts, your ideas. Short, sharp, no safety net, raw fear, ritual energy, and a ticking clock. You'll hear them first, before we descend into the long-form works, the ones that take their time and take something with them. And when it should be over, when the candle should burn out, there's still one story waiting. The final offering. This month it's called Blackroot Hollow, and it only exists here, inside the anthology. You won't find it published anywhere else. No teaser, no short upload. If you want to hear it, you stay until the end. Because some stories, they only open for those who commit. So, settle in. The stories this month come from many places. Some from my head, some from my heart, and some from yours. Welcome to the Dark Anthology Monthly. The Sea Hears You. This story was born from a challenge by Brogans lost from TikTok. They asked, a man inherits a guest house at a seaside resort. While renovating, he discovers his late mum and grandfather are part of an cult that sacrifices guests, and he has to continue the family tradition. This is what I gave them. The Sea Hears You. The lawyer's hand trembled as he passed me the keys to the Tidemark Inn. Family traditions are hard to shake, he muttered, then hurried away before the storm came, leaving me alone on the weathered porch of my inheritance. Inside, salt-worn photographs watched from the walls. Grandmother's gentle smile, grandfather's stern gaze, mother's distant eyes, all innkeepers, all gone now, leaving only whispered legends of how our family protected the coast. The old ledger sat heavy on the front desk, its leather cover smooth from generations of hands. Inside, countless names filled the pages, each paired with a wish. I hope to find peace here. If only I could stay forever. A memory surfaced, grandmother's soft voice coaxing a hesitant guest. It's tradition, dear. Everyone makes a wish at the Tidemark. I dozed in grandmother's office chair. Her lavender perfume still lingered. Beneath it lurked salt, decay, secrets. Grandfather's voice echoed in the hollow spaces between thoughts. When we do what's necessary. Each syllable pressed against my skull like deep water pressure. The alternative is unthinkable. I saw it then. Something vast shifting in oceanic darkness, creating currents that spanned continents. Cities crumbled beneath tidal waves. Millions of lights winked out, each life snuffed by ancient hunger. The vision carried terrible clarity. This wasn't prophecy. It was memory. In the fog of my dream, my feet carried me to the basement. Loose floorboards moved too easily, revealing their shrine, shells arranged in patterns, bones bleached white, stained darker than blood. Ancient texts weren't inked, but carved into bone, elegantly simple. Souls freely given through innocent wishes, harvested at death to feed endless dreams. My rebellion was small, just one page fed to the fireplace. But the sea's response was immediate. Waves taller than the inn crashed violently. The water carried whispers, screams, promises of violence. In fevered dreams, mother's spirit appeared, rippling like disturbed water. Each keeper must choose, her voice thick with brine, break the cycle and doom thousands, or carry the guilt of necessary evil. Behind her, shadows moved with horrible purpose. The storm worsened. Through windows streaked with salt and fear, massive shapes writhed beneath the waves. Something vast stirred, stretched, waking. I snapped back, gasping, sweat soaking my skin. A nightmare, or a memory. The bell of the front door chimed. I jerked awake in grandmother's chair, heart thundering. The sound echoed through the inn like a death knell. A young woman stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, smiling nervously. I heard this place makes wishes come true. My hand trembled as I slid the ledger across the desk, voice steady but eyes haunted. Welcome to the Tidemark. Sign here and do make a wish. The sea hears you. It's mine. This story was born from a challenge by Wanda. She knows what I fear, and she feeds it back to me. Their challenge. The old radio suddenly crackled to life, playing a song that hadn't aired in decades. This is what I gave them. The old radio suddenly crackled to life, playing a song that hadn't aired in decades. As the haunting melody filled the room, the lights flickered, and a whisper brushed cold against her ear. You're not supposed to be here. Startled, I spun around frantically, seeing nothing but a faint wisp of dust drifting lazily through stale air. The radio crackled again, filling my nostrils with the sharp sting of burning ozone. Its tarnished chrome body glowed a sickly yellow, as though it belonged forgotten on a greasy spoon's counter rather than tucked away here, in shadows and silence. I stepped toward it cautiously, strangely comforted by the warmth radiating from inside, beckoning me closer like an old friend. Just as my fingers brushed the cool metal, a whisper sliced the air beside my ear, soft yet sharp as a blade. That's mine. Don't touch it. I spun again. Nothing. Only flakes of dust spiraling gently through dim shafts of light. The air felt heavier now, like the room itself was holding its breath. Static surged from the radio, drowning the ghostly melody beneath waves of crackling distortion. The tune was familiar, half forgotten, like something from a childhood dream you weren't supposed to remember. I reached once more. This time the voice wasn't gentle or whispering. It roared, anger pulsing beneath every word. I said that was mine. Hands off. A force slammed into my jaw like an invisible freight train, rattling my bones and sending a shockwave of agony ripping through my skull. I hit the ground hard, vision flickering in and out, stomach heaving. The room spun violently, my mind swimming through a fog of pain. Blinking rapidly to clear my vision, I stared in disbelief at the impossible creature perched defiantly upon my chest, barely 2 inches tall, wings shimmering delicately like those of a dragonfly. Yet its stare was fierce, proud, and burning with an intensity that would shame a lion. It wore something like a uniform, tattered and faded with tiny symbols I didn't recognize, etched in shimmering thread. Its hands, though small, were clenched into fists tight with fury. It leaned forward, voice now low and commanding. I said, hands off. Now leave. Beneath the surface, beyond the stars. This story was born from a challenge by Yankee Pendragon. Their challenge. What if NASA was the National Oceanic Survey Agency until late 1956, when it became the space agency we know today? What could have prompted that change in mission? This is what I gave them. I approached Doctors Gibbs, Adams, and Scott, leaders in physics, archaeology, and oceanography. The gravity was just off enough to make every step feel unnatural. And despite being 5,000 meters below the surface, the air inside the dome was fresh, dry, almost desert-like. Research Station Nemo was only founded 10 days ago, when they found the pyramid while searching for Atlantis. Apparently, they found more. The ruins, over 3,000 years old, stretch 5 kilometers in all directions from the central structure. The dome, as they called it, half the size of Central Park, held steady against 7,000 pounds per square inch of deep-sea pressure. Not crushed, not leaking, held back by a force we still couldn't explain. I nodded to the scientists. Gentlemen, what you've uncovered is extraordinary. I'd like to see the tomb. Dr. Gibbs' eyes gleamed. We're glad the government's taking this seriously. Colonel Stanton, we believe the sarcophagus houses a power source, or a control interface, maybe a data vault. You mean a computer? Maybe. Dr. Adams glanced at the others, hesitant. Or a prison. Something we're not equipped to handle. I met his gaze. That's why the military's here. Once I understand what this is, I'll go to the president myself. You'll get what you need. Dr. Scott adjusted his jacket. Then let's begin. Inside the chamber, ore pressed against my chest like gravity reversed. Everything looked primitive. Carved stone, weathered symbols, but untouched by time. All of it focused on the sarcophagus. Too small for a man, too important to ignore. They opened it. No gas, no rumble, just a soft click, like it had been expecting us. Inside, an orb, perfectly smooth, skull-sized, pitch black, not just dark, a void. It didn't reflect light. It consumed it. Dr. Gibbs ran a scan. No heat, no radiation, no mass fluctuation. This thing shouldn't exist. Adams whispered, not power, not storage, an interface. Then I felt it, a pull, not on my body but on my thoughts. I reached out. They shouted. I didn't stop. My fingers touched the orb, and the world shattered. The voice came not in words but meaning, direct, unfiltered, final. We see you. I was connected. I couldn't pull back. No body, no voice, just thought. You are not first. You are not last. Your ascent broadcasts. Your curiosity reveals. Your species signals. Location confirmed. Prepare. Extraction begins. We will come for you. They know we are here now, Mr. President. We have to prepare. The Black Vow. This story was a challenge by Thomas P. Their challenge. You have at best a year to live. So you decide to return to the old town where you first loved to see if you can find out what happened to her and if any of the old flame exists. This is what I gave them. The convent burned decades ago, but the charred skeletal frame lingered at the town's edge like a wound no one dared touch. You step from your car, body weak from the doctor's verdict. 12 months if you're lucky. Why waste it here, chasing ghosts? Because she was your ghost first. Jill. That summer felt eternal. Endless evenings beneath lavender twilight. Whispering secrets on your porch swing, her head warm on your shoulder. Her hair smelled of wildflowers, honey-colored strands tangled in your fingers. County fair kisses, sticky sweet atop the Ferris wheel. Laughter lost in popcorn and cotton candy clouds. Nights at the drive-in, windows fogged, her mischievous eyes sparkling in black and white horror, gripping your hand tighter at every jump scare, pretending she was frightened. Always letters, promises sealed in ink and paper, bridging distance after your family moved away. You poured your soul onto those pages, breathless for replies, until the letters slowed and stopped. Her final note arrived in unfamiliar handwriting, a shaky confession. I think I might become a nun. The words cut deep, leaving only the hollow ache of unanswered questions. The town whispers warnings about the ruins, glimpses of black robes gliding through moonlit ashes, chanting beneath trees, shadows moving wrongly. You dismiss superstition until you cross the threshold, symbols etched in soot-marred stone, echoes of prayers twisted into something forbidden. Beneath the convent, stairs spiral down, hidden by decades of denial. In the belly of this forgotten place, the air tastes of iron and lost faith. Jill waits, unchanged, youthful face untouched by years, eyes shining, darkened with unspeakable secrets. She reaches for you, hand ice cold, voice familiar yet hollow. You finally came back for me. She's not alone. Behind her something foul moves, wet skin stretching over ancient bones. Its massive form shifts, sighing deeply, vibrating through stone, crawling into your bones like decay. A milky, clouded eye opens slowly, fixed unblinkingly, hunger older than prayer. Chains rattle softly, dragging along stone. Whispers rise beneath your feet, tortured voices braided into a desperate plea. Jill's grip tightens, gentle yet iron cold, as the horror approaches, stench heavy enough to choke on. It waited centuries beneath vows whispered in black. Jill murmurs reverently. Every prayer a sacrifice, every promise a binding chain. She steps aside, revealing the twisted altar of bone and scorched flesh. You understand too late. She isn't the victim. She's the keeper, and you are her offering. She smiles sadly, whispering, I've always loved you, but some promises, some duties, we don't get to break. You didn't come to find her. She brought you home to feed the darkness. Ashes of the Eyefull Witness. This story was a challenge by Clintbark 4737. Their challenge, the hidden accounts of an explorer who disappeared in the early 1700s. Written, he claims he found what is the ruins of dead gods. Inside is also a scribbled warning. The Inquisition will silence the Eyefull witnesses with flame. This is what I gave them. Madrid, 1725. Thomas Reyes opened the scorched box bearing his father's name and the Holy Office's seal. His hands trembled, not from fear, but anger. 15 years of silence, and now this charred remnant of his father's life appeared like a ghost. Inside lay a tarnished compass, its silver face scarred by heat. Tomas traced familiar dents where his small fingers once gripped too tightly, while his father's warm hands steadied his own. The stars never lie, mijo, he'd say gently. Men do. Beneath the compass, wrapped in singed cloth, was a leather journal. The pages were brittle, edges blackened, but his father's precise handwriting remained. The script of a man who believed truth must survive. Smoke-stained entries emerged darker with each page. May 3rd, 1710. The jungle holds secrets. The natives speak of temples that breathe, of stones carved before their ancestors dreamed. I came to study plants, to advance medicine. The inquisitors speak only of demons. May 15th. Today they burned the first village. God help me, the screams. Children ran while mothers burned. Inquisitors claimed they found pagan worship, a clay pot, a carved stone, things older than our Christ. Captain Herrera smiled as he lit the flames. June 2nd. The deeper we push, the more villages we find, the more they burn. The smoke follows now, moving against the wind. Sometimes I see faces I recognize, watching with empty eyes. June 20th. The natives warned us of the great temple. It dreams, they said. It hungers. The inquisitors took their tongues for blasphemy. At night, I hear whispers of beings that slept in stone wombs, waiting for fire. June 21st. The temple rises before us, a mountain of carved flesh. Herrera plans to burn it tomorrow. When I protested, he smiled and said, all of this pagan heresy must burn. God forgive me for what I've witnessed. God protect us from what will wake. June 22nd. It rose from the fire, God's nightmares made flesh. Its form shifted constantly, smoke, flame, something unbearable. Eyes like dying stars watched us burn. It spoke with 1,000 voices, screaming an unknown language. Inquisitors' crosses melted as it hunted them, laughing through the jungle. The final entry shook with warning. The Holy Office burns witnesses to hide their sin, but some truths cannot be burned. It follows me now, wearing the smoke of its birth. Tomas, mijo, they'll claim I died a heretic. What I saw was older than heresy, older than faith. They're coming. They'll silence. The words ended in a violent slash of ink. Beneath the surface. This story was a challenge by Brogan's Lost. Their challenge, our using fossil fuels, leads to us bringing back an ancient supernatural dinosaur predator that has never been recorded before. This is what I gave them. It was back in 48. I was there the day it all started. 112 degrees in the shade, a new record high. But we didn't stop. Mr. Hank was dead sure we'd strike big that day. I'd just been called off the drill to head into the office trailer. My best friend Mike took over for me. That trailer was a metal sweatbox, hotter than hell. Mr. Hank said I had a call about Julie, your grandmother. She was pregnant with your dad. I rushed inside, heart pounding. She wasn't due for another month, but back in the 40s, anything could happen. The doctor's voice on the other end was cool and professional. That tone always means something's wrong. When he said the word premature, I stopped breathing. I'd never been that afraid in my life. Then I heard it. The drill screamed. Not the usual groan or grind. This was something different, something alive, like a wounded animal howling through steel. I looked through the trailer's window and saw Mike, tense, frantic. He didn't move like a man in control. He moved like a rookie, like he was about to break. Then came another sound. If the drill's scream was a dying creature, this was something older, bigger. A sound from beneath the ground, thick and heavy like the world itself was trying to speak. No, not speak. Roar. The ground erupted, not oil. Something thicker, darker, red, like blood. The whole site convulsed like it was rejecting us. The earth cracked open and the drill rig was flung aside like a toy. Then I saw it. An arm. Just the forearm and hand, but massive. 3, maybe 4 times the size of the rig. Black glistening scales. Blood and crude dripping off its claws. The drill still lodged in it like a sewing needle in a bear. A moment ago, premature, was the scariest word I'd ever heard. I was wrong. So very, very wrong. Hidden Room of Remembrance. This story was a challenge from Anonymous. Their challenge: you find a door in your home that you never noticed before. What's inside? This is what I gave them. When I moved to northern Germany in early 2024, I wasn't chasing adventure. I wanted quiet, something slower. The small country town of Eyefull offered that in spades. Cobblestone streets, crooked timber-framed houses, and bakeries that still smelled like childhood. My apartment sat above a closed tailor's shop, its windows bowed slightly with age, as if the building had learned to breathe with the seasons. The unit came pre-furnished in that charming, slightly oppressive way older German rentals sometimes do. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the hall. Heavy wardrobes loomed in corners like sentinels. The spare room was the only space untouched by the landlord's stiff sense of style, so I chose it as my art studio. It was tiny, maybe 6 by 10 feet, with a stubborn Murphy bed screwed into one wall. I spent a damp March afternoon trying to unscrew it, cursing in English, the wind whistling through cracked panes, when something gave way behind it. The bed thudded to the side, revealing a small 3-foot-tall wooden door. No knob, just a rusted latch and the distinct scent of time. Dust, wood rot, something older, something sad. I crouched, hand trembling just enough to notice, and unlatched it. A hiss of stale air rushed past me, cold, dry, preserved. The crawl space beyond was dark and narrow, roofline tapering to nothing. I switched on my phone's flashlight. The beam caught suspended dust like falling snow. Wooden planks groaned beneath my knees as I crawled inside, my breath loud in the silence. The world behind me, cars, people, springtime, vanished. This place had been sealed away, forgotten. At the far end against the wall sat a heavy wooden chest. Its silver fixtures were blackened with tarnish. I hesitated, heart ticking louder than that hallway clock, and opened it. Inside, layered like fragile dolls, were the remains of 3 children. Skin leathery with age, clothes in tatters. One wore a cap that had half disintegrated. Another clutched a cloth rabbit. Its stitching faded. The third, smallest, wore a shirt with a yellow Star of David sewn onto the breast. I staggered back, knees buckling. My breath caught halfway between a gasp and a sob. The weight of the air changed. I was in Germany. In that Germany. And suddenly the quiet that had felt so comforting now pressed against my chest like guilt. They hadn't just died. They had hidden from something monstrous. This room wasn't just forgotten. It was protected. Their last sanctuary, sealed with desperation, silence, and hope that no longer mattered. The dust settled again. The flashlight cut out, and I realized that I wasn't supposed to find them. Not really. But now that I had, I couldn't ignore them. Not ever again. This one's different. Whistleback was never about music. It's about resonance, about the sounds that crawl inside you and start reshaping you from the inside out. We talk a lot about haunted places. But what if the haunting wasn't a ghost? What if it was a tone, a sound so old and deliberate that it knew how to wait you out, to harmonize with your breath until your lungs forget what silence feels like? I wanted to write a story where possession didn't come through rage or ritual, but through sound that was a living thing. This wasn't about being chosen. It was about being tuned. Let me know if the whistle's still stuck in your head after this, because sometimes that's how it starts. The dogs refused to cross the threshold. He stood at the base of the cracked stone steps, keys clutched in one hand, leashes taut in the other. The mutt, short, red-eyed, half muscle, half bark, planted her feet like a mule, claws carving furrows in the dirt. The shepherd trembled, a soft whine caught in his throat, tail stiff as a steel rod. He gave them a little tug, gentle enough not to hurt. They'd been his shadows for years, his guardians, his friends. Even when things were at their worst, they'd always stayed close. Not now. He crouched beside them, running a hand through the shepherd's fur. The mutt leaned into him for a moment before retreating. Her nose pointed toward the woods, her growl low and steady. He didn't need them to explain. They knew something wasn't right here. They could feel it in the air. The air smelled like pine, iron, and mildew. It wasn't just the old, unlived-in kind of mildew. It was something deeper, colder, like wet stone in a cave you shouldn't have found. He loosened his grip on the leashes, gave them one last reassuring pat, and stepped inside alone. At first they hung back, wary, tails low. But as he reached the doorway, the shepherd crept forward, then the mutt, both moving slowly as if the air itself weighed them down. By the time he crossed the threshold, they were at his side again, their eyes scanning the shadows. No birdsong. That was the first thing he noticed. Just the faint sound of the wind rolling off the woods behind the house. The dogs let out a single sharp bark. They'd followed him in, reluctantly, and now sat stiffly on either side of the doorway, ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the woods. The shepherd whined softly, shifting his weight. The mutt growled low in her chest, a quiet, steady sound that felt more like a warning than a reaction. A whistling sound carried on the wind, high and thin, almost like a flute, almost like breath caught in a throat. He turned back into the house. The living room had grown colder. The dogs moved closer to him, their movements slower than usual, as though every step through this house weighed heavier than it should. The living room had grown colder. He rubbed his arms and walked through to the kitchen. No dust there either. The fridge was unplugged but empty, counters bare. A single old cutting board rested by the sink, knife marks deep in the wood, stained dark in places. The shepherd sniffed it, gave a low huff, and walked to his side. The mutt, though, lingered, tilting her head, as if she'd caught a faint scent he couldn't detect. He ran his fingers over the cutting board, unsure why it made his stomach twist. Back through the hallway. The bedroom was the same, a narrow bed with a wool blanket, shelves lined with books whose spines curled outward like bark. A small, outdated radio sat on the nightstand. No TV, no clocks, no mirrors. The shepherd hopped onto the bed without hesitation, curling up in the far corner, as if trying to blend into the shadows. The mutt stayed by the door, her eyes fixed on him, ears twitching at every small sound. The silence stretched. He reached out and turned the radio's dial. Nothing but static. He adjusted the antenna. Still nothing. No voices. No music. Just that hollow rush of sound like wind dragging across bone. He left it on. The bathroom mirror was missing entirely. Just a rectangle of dust where it had hung. The medicine cabinet was filled with worn labels and old brown bottles. A handwritten note was taped to the back of the door, barely legible from water damage. Do not follow the sound. Do not listen too long. Stay above ground. His mouth went dry. He stepped back into the hall. The wind chimes on the porch gave a short metallic clink. Just one note, then silence. The dogs were no longer barking, but when he looked at them, they hadn't moved. Staring right back at him like frightened children, he turned and caught his own reflection faintly in the glass of the front window. His face looked different somehow, not distorted, just off. The shape of his mouth, the slope of his eyes, a fraction of a second behind when he moved. He blinked. The image snapped back into sync. He slept on the couch. The bedroom felt too distant, too curated, like someone else had made the bed and then laid down on top of it just to see how it felt. The couch at least had a dent in the cushions that matched his body, and the dogs had finally settled nearby. They hesitated at first, pacing, then one after the other, they climbed up onto the couch. The shepherd curled tightly against his side. The mutt draped herself across his legs. They pressed close, warm and steady, as if their weight could anchor him in place. He lay under a wool blanket, radio static humming soft in the background like a cracked lullaby. Moonlight stretched through the window slats in pale lines, angling across the floor like prison bars. Somewhere in the dark, the wind chimes stirred. He drifted. The dream came in fragments. First, a hill, bare and earthen, with something buried in it that breathed. The ground pulsed softly, rising with each exhale. A child's voice sang to it, a melody in an old tongue, broken by laughter that didn't sound young. Then, a flute carved of bone. Someone offered it to him, but every time he reached for it, his hands passed through. He could feel the cold of it, even when it vanished. He heard his name, not spoken, but whistled, as if someone had shaped breath into letters without lips. The sound threaded through the air like wire. It was coming from under the floor. He woke just before dawn, mouth dry, hands stiff, static still hissing from the radio. His head throbbed like he'd been listening to something too loud for too long. One of the dogs whined outside. The other growled. Somewhere in the house, beneath the floorboards, something shifted. Not loudly, not even deliberately. Just enough to let him know it was still there. He didn't speak as he dressed, just pulled on his boots and grabbed the flashlight from his pack. The dogs wouldn't come near the door, even when he called. They stayed at the fence, eyes fixed on the house like it was growing teeth. The cellar door was tucked behind the pantry, half hidden behind a sliding shelf lined with canned goods that had long since expired. The frame was warped, the handle wrapped in electrical tape. He had to lean his weight into it just to get it open. It didn't creak, it groaned. The stairs were narrow and steep. Stone walls lined with old insulation and copper wires hung like vines, strung between bent nails. No light switches, no windows, just cold breath rising from the darkness. He descended slowly, flashlight cutting a thin beam ahead of him. The air grew colder, but not musty. Sterile, preserved, like a wound stitched too cleanly. At the base of the steps, the basement opened into a single unfinished room. Concrete floor, thick wooden beams across the ceiling. In the center sat a ring of wind chimes, small and precise, no two alike. Tin, bone, copper, glass. Suspended over a wide glyph burned into the floor. He stopped just outside the ring. The flashlight beam wavered. There was no dust down here either, but not like the rest of the house. This wasn't absence. It was maintenance. Attention. Someone had been here recently. Someone had kept this place quiet. A thick notebook lay open on a table nearby. Beside it, a handmade flute. Wood blackened at the mouthpiece, worn smooth by fingers. He stepped forward. The wind chimes shifted with no breeze. He froze. A breath, not his, fluttered across his ear like a sigh in reverse. He turned. Nothing. Just the chimes moving gently, as if stirred by memory. He stood still, holding the flashlight like a weapon, though his grip had gone slack. The air felt heavier now, not suffocating. Weighted. As if the room had thickened in his presence, measuring him, not watching, listening. The wind chimes had stopped moving. His breath echoed too loudly in the space, bouncing back at him with just enough delay to make it feel borrowed. Like he wasn't alone. Like someone else was breathing through him. He stepped back, just one pace, and the ring of chimes gave the softest rustle. Not warning, not threat, a note of disappointment. He blinked hard, trying to shake the tightness forming behind his eyes. The kind of pressure you get before a nosebleed, or a panic attack. There was a hum in his ears now, faint, vibrating at the edge of recognition, like an electrical frequency that wasn't quite mechanical. Not a sound exactly, more like the memory of one. He looked at the flute again, just sitting there. Blackened mouthpiece, worn wood. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't even especially well made. But there was a curve to it, like it had bent toward a hand that hadn't held it in years. He realized his fingers were twitching. He wanted to pick it up. His mind recoiled, but his hand had already shifted an inch toward it. His body wasn't responding fast enough to what his gut was screaming. The chimes didn't move, but he felt something lean forward, like the entire room had taken an anticipatory breath. He stepped away from the flute, fast this time, knocked his hip against the table, and sent the notebook sliding slightly to the edge. The glyph beneath the chimes caught the light, a circle split by a jagged line, almost like an open mouth. Teeth? No, not teeth. Bars. Something meant to hold sound in. He reached for the notebook slowly this time, careful not to disturb the flute again. The cover was thick leather, soft with age, corners worn. A faint scent of smoke clung to the pages, not fire, but burnt herbs. Inside, the handwriting was clean. Sharp. No scrawls or frantic loops. Just deliberate script, etched with the kind of focus born from obsession or discipline. April 12th. The chimes hold best when arranged in descending pitch. Copper carries the weight longer than bone. Do not let the wind enter unfiltered. It carries the tone beneath it. He turned the page. April 14th. 3 days without sleep. It wants music, not chaos. It wants to be known. This is not possession. It is residence. It speaks in vibrations, not words. The mind translates what it can. The rest becomes illness. The next page had a drawing, a rough sketch of the glyph on the floor. Notes surrounded it in different inks, like annotations made over years. The mouth is not for eating. It's for release. The song must have form. It must pass through flesh or fade. The piper was the first, but not the only. That name pulled at something in him. The piper. Not as a fairy tale, but a pattern. A presence. Like he'd heard it somewhere, not in a story, but in a lullaby. On a bus. In a fever dream. Somewhere his mind had hidden it, because it hadn't been safe to remember. The next page was blank, but when he touched it, the hum in his ears grew louder, as if the page wasn't empty, just unfinished. A final line had been scratched deep into the lower margin. The Whistleback is not a name, it's a warning. He stared at the sentence, his skin crawling. Something moved in the chimes again. Not the wind this time, It was breath. He closed the notebook, hands trembling, breath held like he was trying not to disturb the air. He backed away from the table, careful not to cross the glyph or brush against the chimes. Each step felt watched, not in the paranoid sense, but like the room had noticed him now, counted him, filed him under useful. He climbed the stairs with deliberate slowness, not daring to turn his back until he reached the top. He shut the cellar door and leaned against it, heart pounding behind his ribs like something trying to escape. The house was unchanged, still quiet, still clean, still listening. He stood there a long time, forehead against the door, hands braced like a man waiting out an aftershock. But it never came. No voice, no crash, just the same faint pressure in his ears, and the knowledge that something in that basement had measured him and hadn't yet made a decision. He made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The mug was almost too hot to hold, but he gripped it like an anchor, his eyes fixed on the table. The shepherd rested his chin on his knee, letting out a low, uncertain huff. The mutt was pacing, short, restless loops around the kitchen, as if she wanted to pull him up and lead him away from whatever had sunk its claws into him. He tried to read something, anything normal, an old magazine, a grocery receipt. The mutt pawed at his leg, the shepherd nudged his free hand, both of them casting worried glances between him and the door. By the time he stepped out into the yard, the dogs shadowed him, sticking close, but their alert posture said they weren't just guarding themselves, they were guarding him. The mutt wouldn't stop looking back over her shoulder at him, whining softly. The shepherd brushed against his side every few steps, pressing in as if to steady him. He tried to nap, but the couch felt too hollow. The dogs lay against him like sentries, their breath warm, their bodies tense. He tried to walk the yard's edge, but their pace quickened to match his, flanking him, ears pricked. Even when he stopped and sat on the porch steps, the mutt pressed her nose to his arm while the shepherd leaned against his shoulder. They watched him, not just the shadows in the woods. It didn't work. That night, the wind picked up again. The chimes outside began to sing softly, one note at a time, as if something in the forest were exhaling music into the wind. He sat on the couch, blanket around his shoulders, radio static hissing low beside him like a tired heartbeat. The dogs were at his feet, their heads resting on his legs, their eyes on him, unmoving. Their steady, silent presence was the only thing keeping him grounded. The melody was different now. Not the random ring of metal in wind, but a tune, fractured, old, off-tempo, but deliberate. A child's lullaby, maybe, or a hunting call. And then, buried deep in the static, just beneath the frequency of hearing, he could swear he heard it again. His name. Whistled. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. He closed his eyes. Drifted maybe, but every time he sank beneath the surface of wakefulness, a sound would pull him back. The chimes, the wind, a whistle that felt like it came from inside his own lungs. By dawn, his head throbbed with the kind of ache that pulsed behind the eyes. He found himself humming over coffee. Not a melody he recognized, just a few strange notes, repeating, rising slightly at the end like a question. He only noticed he was doing it when one of the dogs let out a low, uneasy growl from the porch. The shepherd paced the edge of the deck, ears pinned back. The other sat perfectly still, staring at him. He stopped humming. The dog looked away. He didn't go back into the basement. Not that day. He tried walking the woods, sticking to the cleared paths behind the house, the dogs ever by his side. But even there, something was off. Every branch seemed to lean toward him. Every crow call sounded a half-beat too slow. He could feel something under his feet. Not movement exactly, but tension, as if the forest had paused. By afternoon, he was back inside, pacing the living room. He turned the radio off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the static. He thought about calling someone, a friend, a veterinarian, a priest, But what would he say? Hey, something in my basement is breathing through a flute my dead uncle left behind, and it might be trying to wear me like a jacket. Yeah, that would go well. So instead, he sat down with the notebook again. He opened to a page he hadn't read yet. Further in, newer handwriting, less confident. The lines were tighter together, scrawled like someone afraid to let go of the pen. It remembers my voice, even when I don't speak. It plays me in dreams. I wake up whistling, even when my mouth is closed. I think it's lonely, or pretending to be. I can't tell the difference anymore. He flipped to the last page. A single phrase filled the center in capital letters, pressed deep into the paper. If it offers you music, don't listen twice. That night, he didn't turn the radio on. He unplugged it completely and shoved it into the pantry beneath a stack of unopened canned beans. The hum in his ears didn't stop. He read by candlelight. None of the overhead lights worked anymore. Not broken, not burned out. Just dead. The dogs wouldn't come near him now, but they stayed close enough to keep watch. They huddled together in the far corner of the living room, pressed flank to flank, their eyes fixed on him. They moved only to shift their weight, their ears flicking at faint sounds that barely reached his own hearing. They didn't bark, didn't growl. They just stayed there, silent sentinels, waiting for him to tell them everything was fine. When he passed by a mirror, one of the few left in the hallway, he caught his reflection lagging again. Just a heartbeat, just long enough to make him feel watched from within. He covered the mirror with a towel and didn't look back. Sometime after midnight, a sound woke him. Not a crash, not a voice, a note, clear, hollow, drawn out through a long, wet breath. He sat upright on the couch. The wind had died down hours ago. The chimes outside were still, but he could hear the sound again, softer now, closer. Not from outside, not from the basement, from the hallway. He rose, barefoot, holding his breath. The hallway light flickered once and went dark again. But down the corridor, past the bathroom door and the towel-draped mirror, something glinted in the candlelight. Something wet, a trail, beads of moisture. Perfectly round, perfectly spaced, as if someone, or something, had been dripping slowly as it moved. It led toward the cellar door. He didn't move closer, didn't call out. He just stood there, eyes locked on that glistening path, heart thudding in his chest like a warning drum. Behind him, the radio, still unplugged, let out one short burst of static, a broken whistle, like a breath caught in someone else's throat. He followed the trail. Bare feet on wood, breath held tight, the flashlight cold in his hand. Dogs patrolling around him at a safe distance. The air had changed, warmer somehow, thicker, like walking into a room someone had just left. The droplets glistened in the beam, perfect spheres, unmoving, spaced like punctuation in a sentence he couldn't read. At the cellar door he paused. The handle was warm. He gripped it anyway. It opened without a sound. The descent was slower this time. The chimes below were already moving, softly, erratically, like someone breathing through different lungs with each note. The flashlight flickered as he reached the bottom step. The glyph still burned in the center of the floor. The flute still sat where he'd left it. But something else was there now. A shape, not fully visible, not fully formed. It hung just beyond the chimes, like breath frozen in air, coalescing and collapsing with each faint whistle. Not a body, not a face, just the outline of a presence shaped by the sound. It wasn't moving toward him. It was waiting. His mouth felt dry. He tried to swallow, but his throat wouldn't obey. The journal's final warning echoed in his mind. Don't listen twice. And yet, he had. In the dreams, in the static, in his own breath when he wasn't paying attention. He had listened, again and again, and now he could hear something more. Not just melody. Language. The whistles carried meaning. Not words, but tone. Emotion. Need. The Whistleback wasn't calling out. It was calling in, and he was already answering. He backed away. Not fast, carefully, like a man trying not to startle something sleeping beside him. The flashlight trembled in his hand, beam catching the shimmer of that not-quite shape. The chimes clinked in gentle rhythm, like breath through broken teeth. Another step back, then one more. He reached the stairs, turned, ran. He took the steps 3 at a time, heart slamming, lungs scraping for air that no longer felt clean. The flashlight bounced against the wall, casting long, broken shadows up the narrow shaft. He hit the kitchen floor hard, scrambled forward, slammed the cellar door shut behind him. The dogs were barking again, this time wild, frantic. They clawed at the door, howling like they'd seen something he hadn't. He locked the cellar door, then pushed a chair under the knob, then backed away. But the house didn't change. There was no crash, no scream, no shattering of wood, just the soft, steady whistle from somewhere behind the door. Not loud, not forceful, inviting. He staggered outside. Cold night air hit him like a slap. The sky was clear, full of stars he didn't recognize, not because they were foreign, but because they felt closer. He made it to the shed. The dogs were circling, whining, pawing at the ground. The mutt looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, like she already knew he was gone. He slammed the door, bolted it, collapsed against the far wall, breathing fast. No wind, no trees moving, just that sound. Inside him now, faint, constant. A low whistle in the back of his throat, rising with each breath. He clamped a hand over his mouth, held it in, but the dogs backed into the corner of the shed anyway, and the wind chimes, hanging far across the yard, began to sing on their own. He laid down on the cold earth floor, but he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time his eyes drifted, the whistle would rise, louder in his chest, like his own lungs were tuning themselves to another frequency. By dawn, his nose had started bleeding. The dogs still wouldn't look at him. They stayed close, lying at the far edge of the room, ears pinned back and eyes darting toward him in flickering, wary glances. The mutt huffed quietly, and the shepherd shifted his paws, but neither of them moved to leave. They didn't trust what they were seeing, but their loyalty kept them near. He caught them watching him sometimes, not a warm, familiar gaze, but something more searching, as if they were waiting for him to explain what was happening to him. The dogs followed him back into the house. He left some food in their bowls, though neither approached until he turned his back. They ate quickly, nervously, and then returned to their corner. He sat at the table, stared at the keys in his hand, and then rose. They didn't stop him. But as he walked out the door, the shepherd made a low, uncertain sound in his throat. The mutt's ears twitched at the sound of the engine, but neither followed him. He drove. Still in yesterday's clothes, eyes sunken, the whistle humming faintly behind his teeth. The static of the old engine didn't drown it out. He barely noticed the passing village, the hills. On the autobahn he moved as though the miles were a blur, his mind spinning around the same thought. What have I done? The sound didn't fade, it sharpened. And now, when he looked at other drivers, he saw them flinch. A few stared at him like he was leaking something they couldn't name. One child in the back of a passing car started crying the moment they locked eyes. He turned off the highway, tried a motel. 2, actually. The moment he stepped into the lobby of the first, the clerk recoiled. Not visibly, not rudely, just enough to know that something wasn't right. The second wouldn't even let him through the door. "Sorry, we're full," the man lied, eyes never leaving the shadow of the doorway behind him. He drove until sunset, found an empty road pull-off by a lake, sat on the hood of the truck and watched the last of the light bleed across the water. He didn't feel tired anymore. He didn't feel anything. Only the sound. Now a song. Now his song. He sat by the lake until the stars came out. He thought about drowning. Not poetically, logistically. The water was deep, cold, remote. If he filled his pockets with stones and walked in slowly enough, maybe the weight would drag the sound down with him. Maybe water could mute the melody. He stood, took a few steps toward the bank, stopped. The whistling grew louder, not frantic, not angry, concerned, like it feared being alone again. His knees buckled. He dropped to the gravel, gasping, hands over his ears. But the sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was behind his tongue, beneath his ribs, every breath a low, rising hum he couldn't suppress. He stumbled back to the truck, sat in the driver's seat, shaking, reached into the glove box and pulled out the old tape recorder his uncle used to carry everywhere. Field notes, bird calls, wind patterns. He remembered him sitting on the back porch, recording nothing but silence for hours. Said he was trying to find the shape of things that don't want to be seen. He hit record, pressed the mic to his lips, and whistled. The sound came out clean, whole, not from his throat but from somewhere deeper. Something responded, not in the recorder, not in the air, in him. A second whistle, higher, layered beneath his own. The harmony clicked like a key in a lock, and suddenly, he knew the next note. He knew the whole song. He threw the recorder into the lake, watched it sink, bubbles rising like ghosts. The whistling stopped for a moment. The silence that followed was worse. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a lover turning their face away in disappointment. He returned to the house just before dawn. The sun hadn't crested the hills yet, but the sky was bruising with light. The dogs were there. As he pulled into the driveway, their ears perked up, tails wagging. They bounded toward him, their excitement palpable, sniffing his boots, nudging his legs, as though everything was back to normal. But then their enthusiasm faltered. The mutt froze first, tilting her head, then back to step, her tail slowing. The shepherd's wagging stopped altogether, his ears flattening against his head. They exchanged a glance, almost as if they were trying to confirm with each other what they were sensing. They stayed nearby, circling him in slow, measured steps, alert but hesitant. They didn't leave him. They never left. But the joy they'd shown just moments before was gone, replaced by that quiet, watchful tension. They walked inside with him, careful not to stray too close, watching him as though he were a stranger they still wanted to protect. The glyph in the basement pulsed faintly now, lit from within like coals beneath ash. The wind chimes turned slowly without breeze, catching just enough movement to whisper. The flute waited in the center. At the top of the stairs, the dogs stood side by side, heads low, their ears pinned back. The shepherd whined softly, his tail flicking once, uncertain. The mutt shifted her weight, pressing close to her companion, as though silently asking what to do. Neither came any closer. They just stood there, watching him descend, their eyes filled with something deeper than fear, a quiet, terrible understanding. This might be the moment he slipped away from them forever. He stepped past the edge of the containment ring, felt the shift immediately, his breath synced with something else's, like breathing in harmony with a second set of lungs. He picked up the flute. It was warm, not from the room, from recognition. He raised it to his lips, fingers curled around the carved grooves like they'd never forgotten the shape. He played the first note. Pain lanced through his teeth, into his jaw, down his spine. Not physical, not nerve deep. This was identity peeling away. He felt his name slip loose from him, like a jacket shrugged off in fog. Another note. Memories shattered like glass on stone, birthdays, voices, warmth, All sifted out. A third. The glyph flared. The chimes wailed once, then fell silent. And with the final breath, the melody completed itself. He didn't fall. He didn't scream. He simply ceased to be a man with a name and became a structure, a vessel, the new walls of the cage. The house grew still. The wind outside softened. The chimes settled. The air reset itself like breath held after a scream. Below the floorboards, the presence coiled inward, sated, anchored, not banished, never banished, just cradled again in flesh and will. At the top of the basement stairs, the dogs lay silent and still, their bodies slack against the cold wood. Their fur was matted at the ears, dark streaks trailing down their necks, as though the sound had poured through them, leaving them emptied. There were no paw shifts, no quiet whines, only an unnatural stillness, the kind that spoke of something having reached too far and taken too much. And the man who had come to inherit the house, he was still there, but not in any way the world would recognize. The next time someone crossed the threshold, they wouldn't hear footsteps. They'd pause, unsettled, unsure why the walls felt closer than they should. And if they listened, really listened, they'd hear a low, rising whistle, almost imperceptible, drifting from the corners of the room, as if the house itself were quietly exhaling. Thanks for taking the time to listen to Whistleback. What did you think of the story? Was it the unnerving silence of the house that stayed with you, or the connection between the man and the dogs? I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories. Drop a comment below and let's discuss what really happened beneath those floorboards. Next up is the Veiled Tapestry episode 5. Grief doesn't wait for permission. It moves in like fog, quiet at first, then thick enough to get lost in. The Veiled Tapestry is a slow descent, not into madness, not exactly, but into something older than logic, a place where family secrets don't just linger, they echo. In this episode, John is starting to see the threads, the lies, the old wounds, the doors that were meant to stay shut, and as he pulls on them, the past starts pulling back. This one's not about ghosts. It's about what happens when you look too closely at the weave of your life and realize it wasn't woven for you. John's life had veered off course since Uncle James's death. Days no longer ticked by in simple hours, but in relentless questions, haunting and unanswerable. Savannah felt heavier somehow, as if the entire city were holding its breath, secrets tucked between its cobblestones like whispered truths in a confessional. His hotel room was transformed into a makeshift command center. Textbooks on forensic analysis lay open on the small desk, notes scribbled hastily in the margins. John paced restlessly, glancing over pages worn thin by countless late-night study sessions. The old mantra from his teacher, Professor Mills, echoed in his mind. Every detail matters. But now, that promise of purpose mocked him, hanging like a bitter taste at the back of his throat. Hope watched him quietly from across the room, concern deepening the lines on her brow. Finally, she shut her laptop and broke the silence gently. "John, talk to me. What's going through your head?" He stopped pacing, shoulders tense as he faced her. "Hope, I studied forensics because I wanted to make a difference. Uncle James believed in me, always said I had a knack for seeing patterns other people missed. But here I am, trained, ready, and completely fucking useless." She stood, crossing the room to him, her eyes filled with empathy. "Baby, you're not useless. You're grieving. Nobody expects you to solve this by yourself. If not me, then who?" John's voice cracked slightly, revealing the raw frustration simmering beneath. "The police? They're treating me like I'm some meddling kid. My uncle is dead, Hope. Murdered. And I've never felt so powerless." "You're allowed to feel lost, John, I get it. But please," she said, taking his hand gently, fingers intertwining with his, grounding him. "Be careful. Racing ahead blindly won't help. It won't bring James back. His eyes softened as he squeezed her hand, the comfort of her touch briefly easing the ache. I know you're right, but sitting here waiting feels impossible. If I can just get through to them, convince them I know what I'm doing, maybe they'll take me seriously. Hope sighed softly, nodding reluctantly. All right, babe. Just promise me. No heroics. Be careful. He leaned in, pressing a grateful kiss to her forehead. I promise. John grabbed his keys and stepped outside into the thick, humid savanna air. The ghost of Hope's touch lingered, a fleeting comfort quickly overshadowed by the dark weight of uncertainty and the burning need to find answers that only seemed to move further from his reach. By the time John reached the police station, his mind was a tempest, each thought colliding and splintering against the edges of his control. His heart thumped steadily but tight, a metronome keeping time to the anxiety crawling beneath his skin. The building stood in sterile defiance to the chaos inside him. Buzzing fluorescent lights, starkly polished tiles, and the mechanical hum of routine clashed jarringly against the shadowed reality he now inhabited. The station's air was thick with the aroma of stale coffee and antiseptic cleaners, yet beneath that familiar scent lurked something John couldn't quite identify. Something that felt off, unsettling, and deeply wrong. At the reception desk, a weary officer tapped absently at a keyboard, his gaze vacant until John approached. I'm John Gray, he said, his voice calm yet edged with urgency. My uncle, James Gray, was the recent homicide victim. I'm here to talk to Detective Williams. The officer barely acknowledged him, eyes glazed over from exhaustion. We've given your family all the information we can. It's an active investigation. There's nothing more we can tell you at the moment. John leaned forward, his voice sharpening, determination cutting through his carefully restrained patience. Look, I understand procedure, but I studied forensic science. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want answers. Maybe I can even help. The officer finally glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly at the controlled intensity in John's voice. With a reluctant sigh, he reached for the phone. Detective Williams is handling your uncle's case. Hold on. Moments later, John was escorted down a narrow hallway to a cramped, dim office, overflowing with case files and forgotten coffee cups. Detective Nathan Williams sat behind a cluttered desk, shadows under his eyes betraying his sleepless nights. His gaze was assessing, quietly weighing John's presence with practiced suspicion. Hello, Mr. Gray. His voice a tempered southern drawl sharpened by the stress of his work. Wish I had better news for you, son, but this case, it's complicated. John met the detective's gaze directly, pushing down the rush of frustration that threatened to cloud his judgment. Detective Williams, my uncle wasn't just anyone to me. I studied forensic science precisely for situations like this. I understand how cases are built, the importance of details. Let me help, or at least share what you've got so far. Please. Williams rubbed his jaw thoughtfully, clearly conflicted. His eyes searched John's face, weighing the earnestness and pain in his expression against the procedural walls erected by years on the job. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, the burden of his choice settling heavily across his shoulders. I understand your need for answers, Williams began cautiously, but involving you directly could jeopardize this investigation. If any piece of this leaks, the suspect could walk. That's not something I can risk, no matter how sincere your intentions. John leaned forward, his voice laced with barely contained tension. I'm not asking you to break protocol. Just give me something, anything. You can't expect me to sit quietly while his killer goes free. Williams shook his head firmly, his voice holding a gentle but impenetrable finality. I've said all I can. Go home, John. Be there for your family. John's frustration surged, cracking through his composure. Can I at least access his shop or house? Go through his things? Once the forensic team wraps up tomorrow morning, not a moment sooner, Williams replied evenly, his voice unyielding but not unkind. John's temper finally snapped. Rising abruptly, he shot back with bitter sarcasm, "Glad to see you're doing your best." His parting words echoed sharply as he stormed out, each step carrying him further from the neat, structured world of law enforcement and deeper into the tangled darkness that had claimed his uncle's life. Williams watched John leave, guilt shadowing his expression as he reached for his phone. Once the door shut behind John, he dialed quickly, speaking in a low, uneasy voice. "Connor, it's Detective Williams. We've got a problem. James's nephew, he's not going to let this go easy." Back at the hotel, John shared what he'd learned from Detective Williams. Hope listened closely, concern creasing her brow. "John, maybe there's something at the shop the police missed. Are you sure you want to get involved in this?" John's voice sharpened, cold with purpose. "I have to, Hope. Uncle James didn't deserve whatever happened to him. I need to know who, or what, did this." She reached out, ever his steady anchor. "Just promise me you'll be careful. We don't know what we're walking into." He nodded, trying to sound more certain than he felt. "I will. We'll figure this out. Together." The next morning, they returned to Uncle James's shop. The police had finished their sweep, and for the first time since the murder, the place was theirs to enter. John slid the key into the lock of the makeshift temporary door. His hand trembled slightly. There was a weight in the air, grief, fear, and something darker still. As the door creaked open, a knot twisted in his gut. The door opened to chaos. Shards of the original door littered the floor, and toppled shelves spilled books and artifacts across the room. The musty scent of old paper mingled with an acrid, unsettling odor. Hope recoiled, her voice tight with shock. "Oh my God, John! Who could have done this?" John's jaw clenched, his expression darkening. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." They stepped inside, careful not to disturb the debris. Broken glass crunched beneath their shoes. Hope's eyes were drawn to the taped outline on the floor. Her voice cracked. "That's where they found Uncle James." John followed her gaze to the faint bloodstain beside the outline. "We need to figure out what happened, Hope. Maybe the police missed something." She moved closer to him, reaching for his hand. Her touch grounded him. "We'll figure this out together." They began sifting through the wreckage, searching for anything out of place. John picked up the broken frame of what looked like an ornate mirror. Hope studied it. Why would someone break a mirror? "I'm not sure, but it looks deliberate. We should hang on to it, just in case." As they dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Some items were destroyed, others conspicuously untouched. "John," Hope said, pointing, "look at these. It's like someone skipped over them on purpose." He examined the scene. Whoever did this was searching for something specific. When they didn't find it, they left in a hurry. "We'll need to check James's records, see what he was working on." Hope nodded, determined. "We'll figure it out." They catalogued anything unusual, the sense of being watched never fully leaving them. The shop, once warm with nostalgia, now felt like a threshold to another world. John sat at his uncle's old desk, fingers brushing worn wood, the weight of legacy settling over him. Then came the sound of the bell above the door. A figure stepped in, tall, olive-skinned, with dark hair and an easy confidence. Jude. The door groaned shut behind him as he entered, casting long shadows across the floor, shadows that seemed to reach out. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back meticulously, revealing sharp hazel eyes and a scar that traced his jawline, a scar whose origin he'd always deflected with charming vagueness. His face was carved from secrets, features unreadable but attentive, taking in every detail of the chaos with practiced ease. He wore a tailored black coat, silver rings etched with ancient symbols, glinting ominously in the dim shop lights. As he moved, the rings caught the light briefly, shimmering as if reflecting something hidden beneath their polished surface. "John," Jude said calmly, voice smooth yet controlled, expertly masking his thoughts as he read the room. "I thought you might need some help." John managed a relieved smile, oblivious to the calculating flicker that passed briefly behind Jude's composed expression. "Thanks, Jude. We could use all the help we can get." Jude turned to Hope, extending a hand, his movement smooth, rehearsed, a gesture he'd clearly practiced often. "You must be Hope. I'm Jude, friend of James. I'm sorry we're meeting like this, but I want to help however I can." Hope shook his hand, cautious but polite, feeling a faint, unexpected chill in his grip, despite his warm smile. "It's nice to meet you. John's told me about you. Thank you for being here." Jude's eyes scanned the room, lingering for just an instant longer on the stairway leading upward. "It's a mess. Mind if I take a look around?" "Please do," John said, unaware of Jude's lingering attention. "Your insight could be valuable." Jude crouched to inspect the damage, movements precise, eyes quickly assessing the items scattered about. Whoever did this wasn't just wrecking the place, they were looking for something. These untouched items, not the target. His gaze drifted thoughtfully around the room again. "I took a quick look around earlier. Didn't notice anything missing, but maybe you'll see something I overlooked." Hope frowned, sensing an undercurrent she couldn't quite define. "What were they after?" Jude's voice grew thoughtful, his tone deliberately neutral, carefully constructed. "James had rare books, artifacts, but maybe it was something hidden. Have you checked his upstairs vault? I wasn't able to open it to look." He gestured casually to a locked door at the back of the shop, his fingers lingering momentarily in the air. "He kept things there. Secure. I never saw exactly what myself." John's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion barely awakening. "You think they were after something in the vault?" Hope pulled John aside, her voice low, uneasy tension tightening her words. "I don't trust him." John blinked, confusion evident. "Why not? He worked with Uncle James." "That's exactly it," Hope said urgently, feeling a growing sense of unease. "He had access. He knows where the valuables are, but claims he never saw the vault. What if he's the one who broke in? Now he wants us to lead him to the vault." John's face shifted as realization slowly sank in. He turned back to Jude, noticing the other man's patient, watchful stance. "Jude, I just remembered we're supposed to meet my parents. Can you come back later?" Jude raised a brow subtly, a glimmer of something unreadable flickering across his eyes before nodding. "Of course. Call me if you need anything." His eyes lingered briefly on the stairs once more before he turned to leave, the shop door's bell echoing quietly behind him. Hope watched him leave, her eyes sharp and wary. "Thank you, John. I just don't think we can trust him." "No, you're right," John agreed, a chill now running up his spine. "No one but family goes upstairs. Not until we know who killed Uncle James." Hope squeezed his hand. "We'll get to the bottom of this. Let's check out the vault." They ascended the stairs, the air thickening as if resisting their intrusion. Heavy curtains dimmed the light, casting long shadows. Shelves groaned with ancient tomes. John ran his hand over spines covered in strange symbols and forgotten languages, now aware of a presence that felt distinctly like Uncle James. Hope noticed John's expression darkening, his gaze fixed intensely on something across the room. "What is it?" she asked, her voice edged with concern. John raised a hesitant finger, pointing toward a tapestry hanging heavily against the far wall. "Behind that, there's a door. Uncle James explicitly warned me never to open it. He was deadly serious about it." Hope felt a chill crawl up her spine, her curiosity now mingled with a primal unease. She reached out carefully, pulling the tapestry aside to reveal a solid wooden door marked by deeply inscribed arcane symbols. A sudden coldness gripped her, as she realized how disturbingly similar they were to those she'd glimpsed on James's coffin. "These markings," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They feel like more than decoration. They mean something." John swallowed hard, fighting a rising apprehension. "It feels wrong, but we need answers." Without another word, he stepped forward, instinctively tracing the symbols. His fingers moved almost without conscious thought, compelled by a memory he didn't fully understand. A mechanical click resonated through the room, deceptively gentle, followed instantly by a sharp, burning jolt that shot violently through John's hand and up his arm. He stumbled backward, a sickening dread pooling in his chest. "Damn it," he gasped, shaking his hand to dispel the lingering pain. It felt alive, like it judged me. Hope rushed to his side, eyes wide. "Maybe we're not supposed to open it yet. Perhaps there's more we need to learn first." John flexed his trembling fingers, frustration and fear battling openly in his expression. He cast a wary glance toward the staircase they'd just ascended, half expecting Jude's shadow to appear again. Or maybe it's designed to keep something locked in, and us locked out. She took his hand, gently inspecting the reddened skin, her tone firm yet calming. Or it's testing us, making sure only someone who truly understands these secrets can open it. The silence hung heavily between them as they stared at the sealed door, its cryptic symbols mocking them. An oppressive sensation, almost a physical weight, enveloped the room. "We'll figure it out," Hope said, attempting to reassure them both, despite feeling the unsettling weight of unseen eyes. "When the time is right, it'll open." John nodded slowly, though his unease didn't diminish. "We should check the shop again. Maybe Jude overlooked something." Descending the stairs, they felt the shadows pressing in more closely, as if whispering lingering warnings in their ears. The feeling of being watched was relentless, every item they touched now taking on a sinister undertone. They sifted through the shop once more, each artifact and tome screaming silently with suspicious intent. Evening shadows lengthened, deepening the room's oppressive atmosphere. Finally, drained physically and emotionally, they secured the door behind them. The lock clicked with unsettling finality, yet they both knew it offered little real safety. The mystery of Uncle James's death still haunted every breath. They knew now, without question, they weren't alone. This dark revelation was only the beginning. So what do you think is hidden behind that vault door? Is it protecting something or locking something away? I'd love to hear your theories down in the comments. Darkwater, Episode 5. Smoke and Mirrors. Every empire rots from the inside first. In Darkwater, Episode 5, the cracks are no longer hidden. The town knows something is wrong. The people know. Even Willem Koopmans knows, though he'd never admit it. This episode is about unraveling control, about media manipulation, performative power, and the monsters we unleash when we forget that fear can think. The void is watching. The blood is rising. And Koopmans, he's about to learn that mirrors lie, but smoke always leads back to the fire. The fog hung low over Saltmarsh, thick and slow-moving, a living thing reluctant to let the town breathe. Morning clung to the narrow alleys and sagging rooftops, dimming what little light pierced the clouds. Gulls circled somewhere overhead, their cries distant, brittle. Martellus Vale moved through the haze with the weariness of a man too stubborn to retire and too proud to rest. Ink stained his fingers. His scarf was pulled high. The leather satchel on his shoulder bounced with every uneven step. The streets still glistened with the dawn's wet breath, and the salt in the air stung the eyes. He passed clusters of low murmurs, currents circling around him. Two dockhands lingered near a boarded-up tavern, smoking and whispering. "Moved like fog," one muttered, eyes flicking toward the mist. "Didn't make a sound. Just blood and gone." "Bullshit," the other grunted. "It's just a man. A mad one, sure. But flesh and blood. Vale walked on. Further up, two fishmongers loaded crates onto a rickety cart, heads close. "Saw the body myself," one said. "What was left of it?" "Don't say that," the other whispered. "You want him to hear you?" "Oh, he ain't gonna hurt the likes of us. Goes after thugs, he does." Vale said nothing. The rumors had shifted. No longer whispers of Darkwater, but stories woven with awe and dread. A man, or something like one, leaving corpses of the wicked in his wake, then vanishing like a ghost. He turned the corner and approached his office, wedged between a fish stall and a tanner's shop. A faded sign above the door read, "The Salt Marsh Broadsheet." The paint had long since peeled, but the words endured. He pushed through the door. The office smelled of wet paper, cold ink, and oil from the old press in the back. Pale light bled through a grimy window, casting long bars across stacked proofs and yesterday's deadlines. Vale stepped inside and stopped. Someone was sitting in his chair. Not a boy, not some overeager apprentice or a ragged thug looking to score. The man was tall and slender, with features carved for cutting rather than smiling. His suit, dark grey, perfectly tailored, held no wrinkle, no speck of dust. Pale skin, hair the colour of tarnished iron, slicked back tight against his skull. Hands rested on the arms of the chair, like a man seated on a throne. He looked comfortable. Vale took a slow breath. "You're in my chair." The man didn't move, didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the wall behind the desk, where old headlines hung like artifacts. He studied them for a beat longer, then turned his head, slowly. "Mr. Vale," he said, voice low, smooth as polished steel. "Good morning." There was no smile, just a polite stillness, the kind that raised hairs on Vale's neck. "You have me at a disadvantage," Vale said, not moving closer. "I don't believe we've met." He stood, taller than Vale expected, lanky, but not weak. There was strength there, lean, precise, the kind that didn't bluff. He stepped to the desk, reached into his coat pocket, and laid down a folded sheet of parchment. The ink on the headline was still drying. "Terror in the shadows. Darkwater strikes again." "You're Van Horn's man, aren't you?" Koopmans Vale said. Not a question. Koopmans glanced at him, brief, clinical. "I see my reputation precedes me. And I see you're under the impression this is your office." "It could be," Koopmans said softly. "If you'd like it to be." Vale narrowed his eyes. "Is that a threat?" Koopmans tilted his head, almost curious. "No," he said. "It's a transaction. I'm giving you a story that practically writes itself. A killer in the shadows. A public hungry for someone to blame. All I ask is that you shape the narrative." Vale picked up the paper. The font was flawless. The framing, dangerous. "I print this," he said, "and I stop being a journalist." Koopmans leaned forward. His eyes were grey, not empty, not dull, just hollow, like someone had removed what should have been behind them and forgotten to fill the space. "You print this," Koopmans murmured. "You let Saltmarsh believe what it already wants to believe. Because, Mr. Vale," he stepped closer, "I'd hate to see Saltmarsh lose its broadsheet. Getting information to the people is so important. They'd be lost without someone to tell them what to think." The silence between them thickened. Vale held his ground, but his breath had gone shallow. He'd dealt with dangerous men before, smugglers, blackmailers, war criminals in exile. But this wasn't the kind of danger that stabbed you in an alley. This was the kind that didn't need a knife. It ruined you quietly and left you grateful. Koopmans turned, walking to the door. "You don't have to lie," he said, hand on the knob. "Just give them the shape of the monster they're already afraid of." He opened the door, paused, looked back with that same eerie calm. "And if you're still unsure, ask yourself this. Do you really want to find out what happens when they stop fearing Darkwater and start fearing you? The bell above the door jingled once, then silence. Vale stood alone in the fog-thick office, the paper still in his hand. Outside, Saltmarsh breathed low and uneasy. Saltmarsh after nightfall became something else entirely. The fog grew teeth, shadows thickened, windows shuttered tight. The cobbled streets slicked with sea brine and secrets. Dark water moved through it like a blade through black silk. He didn't walk. He slipped, as if the space between steps no longer mattered. His long coat drifted behind him like tattered smoke. No breath, no boots, just silence pressing at the edges of the world. "You're slipping," came the voice. Not spoken, pressed, wet and slow against the edges of his mind. Drevar, not a name, a pressure, a presence that coiled around his spine like something with too many teeth. "I don't hunt for your pleasure," Darkwater muttered. His voice was gravel and rust. "Then hunt for your own. You used to." A pause, thick with mockery. "Or have you gone soft again, chasing ghosts of the man you were?" Darkwater paused beneath the skeletal remains of a collapsed overpass, eyes sweeping the alleys. Water dripped steadily from above, echoing like slow knives. "I choose the ones who deserve it, not just anyone. Everyone deserves it." Drevar's laughter slithered into his ears. "You think there's innocence left in Saltmarsh? They'd burn you at the stake if they could. Sell your bones to Van Horn for a bottle of dream lily-laced rum. You're not a man. You're my blade. Let me cut." Darkwater clenched his fists, breath slow and measured. The locket at his chest, tucked beneath layers of shadow, felt heavier tonight. He touched it, just for a second. "You don't get to decide who I become. Then maybe you shouldn't have bound yourself to me." Then, sound shattered the stillness. A scream, sharp, human, close. Darkwater's head snapped up. Another scream, muffled. A woman's voice, ragged, terrified, down the alley. He moved. His coat flared as he turned, vanishing into shadow. Boots silent on stone. Drevar said nothing, but his presence swelled with hunger. "Yes," the voice whispered inside him. "Let's feed." The alley narrowed like a throat, lined with broken crates and damp stone. Fog pooled low, curling around rusted barrels and rotted rope. Lanterns flickered overhead, their glow faint and jaundiced, casting long, crooked shadows. Darkwater moved like a wraith. He found her near the far end. A woman, mid-30s maybe, pressed against the wall. Blood streaked down her arm. Her breathing was ragged, one shoe gone. 3 men surrounded her, thick-shouldered brutes with knives in their hands and rot in their eyes. One of them laughed, dragging his blade along the brick, metal scratching stone. Then he stopped. All 3 turned. Something had changed. The air had gone cold. From the far end of the alley, Darkwater stepped into view. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The first thug bolted, instinct trumping greed. The other 2 held position, blades rising. "Who the fuck?" That was as far as he got. Darkwater moved. One blink, there. The next, on them. Steel flashed. His or theirs, it didn't matter. One knife hand snapped at the wrist with a bone-popping crack. The second swung wide, too slow. Darkwater ducked low, twisted, and drove his elbow into the man's throat with a wet crunch. The woman screamed again. Less fear now, more shock. She turned to run. A figure emerged from the shadows behind her. Koopmans. Immaculate, silent, watching. Koopmans caught her as she passed. Gently, like a dancer taking a partner's hand. Her relief barely had time to register before the blade slid beneath her ribs. Clean, precise, clinical. She gasped but didn't fall. Not yet. She kept running. Koopmans stepped back into the dark, wiped the blade. Gone. Darkwater turned the corner, just in time to see her stumble. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into the dirt. No cry, just breath, leaving her like a whisper. He blinked. No one had been near her. No strike, no flash of steel. And yet, there she was. He rushed to her side, crouching low in the filth. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and fast. His hands moved on instinct, pressing the wound, trying to slow what couldn't be stopped. Her lips trembled, her eyes flickered. No, no, stay with me. He turned her gently. The wound was clean, deep. Not the kind of wild slash a panicked thug would make. Too precise. But the alley had been clear. The only ones armed were already down. They didn't touch her, he muttered. She was past them. So who killed her? Drevar crooned. Are you sure it wasn't you, in the frenzy? Or maybe one of them? Last swing, lucky shot. Darkwater's chest tightened. His grip on her arm trembled as the truth clawed at the edge of his mind. Something was wrong. She was running, he whispered. She was going to get out. But she didn't. Drevar's voice was smug now. And that's what the people in the street saw. You, crouched over her, dripping shadow and blood. At the alley mouth, the fog parted. Figures appeared, dozens, some with lanterns, some with blades, others with tools clenched in shaking hands. One screamed, another pointed. They think you killed her, Drevar said, voice thick with hunger. And maybe, in the end, you did. He stared down at her face, eyes gone glassy, blood still warm against his hands. Then the shouts rose, the crowd surged, and Darkwater vanished, lost to the fog, guilt dragging behind him like a chain. The tavern wasn't known for elegance, but Koopmans had requested the back room anyway, a space usually reserved for smugglers, debt lords, or the occasional celebratory wake. Tonight, it belonged to him. A fire crackled in the hearth. Oil lamps glowed soft and amber. The table was set with a meal that didn't belong in Saltmarsh. Braised venison, poached trout in citrus wine, root vegetables roasted in lard and crushed pepper. A bottle of red, imported, aged, obscenely priced, breathed in a decanter. Koopmans sat alone. He cut the meat with the precision of a surgeon, ate slowly, methodically, posture perfect. Napkin folded crisp across one knee. He tasted nothing. No warmth, no depth, no joy. The wine could have been salt water, the trout, paper, the venison, ash. But he chewed, swallowed, sipped, performed. Because this wasn't sustenance. It was theater. And power demands an audience, even if it's only your reflection. His reflection in the silver plate stared back with cold approval, still playing the role. Still holding the shape of a man, he unfolded the broadsheet beside his plate, smoothing it with care. Terror in the shadows. Darkwater strikes again. Below the illustration, a monster crouched over a limp figure. Just enough ink to suggest blood. Just enough vagueness to let the reader's fear do the rest. Whispers drifted in from beyond the thin wall. They say he killed her, tore her open like an animal. She was innocent, wasn't she? That's what the papers said. Doesn't matter anymore, does it? He's gone rabid. A pause. Then, softer. He was trying to help. I saw him once. Saved that girl from the red knives. Then why's he hiding? Why'd he run? You think a hero leaves a woman dead in the street? Silence. Then someone muttered. Low. Almost reverent. Saltmarsh needs protection, not monsters. Koopmans smiled. This one was real. Small. Tight. Mechanical. The narrative was taking hold. Darkwater sat beneath the broken ribs of a collapsed pier, cloaked in shadow and salt. Behind him, the sea whispered, sucking at the rocks like a hungry thing. His coat clung to him, damp with blood. His or someone else's. It didn't matter anymore. His shoulder throbbed where the blade had pierced him. but it was already closing. Flesh knit together in slow, unnatural pulses, the skin still raw, blood drying in streaks, but the wound was no longer open. It never stayed open for long. He didn't stitch anymore, not since the changes took hold. A small mercy, one that cost him something he hadn't named, and it was the tremor in his mind that hurt worse. "You're unraveling," Drevar murmured from somewhere inside him. "The man you were is just skin now, dead skin peeling off." He said nothing. His eyes locked on a crumpled piece of parchment, wedged between the stones, fluttering like a dying bird. The ink was smeared from damp, but still legible. He reached out, slowly, opened it. The headline screamed without sound, "Terror in the shadows. Darkwater strikes again." A sketch. Him, crouched over the woman, frozen in guilt. No mention of the men who attacked her. No detail about the knife wound that didn't match his blade. Just his silhouette, hunched like a butcher over the dead. He didn't move. He just stared. "Look at that," Drevar whispered. "They've given you shape. Finally. I saved her. You tried." A dry laugh. "But what matters more? What happened? Or what they think happened?" Darkwater's fingers clenched. The broadsheet crackled in his grip. "I didn't kill her. You didn't save her either. You could silence them," Drevar hissed. "A few well-placed kills. Burn the Inquirer. Cut out the tongues that whisper your name. Turn fear into truth. I'm not your weapon," he growled. "You bound yourself to me. I bound myself to justice." "Justice," Drevar whispered, his vengeance dressed in priest's robes. He almost gave in, his hand flexed, ready to rise, to strike, to burn. But instead he stood. The broadsheet slipped from his hand and fell into the sea. He turned away. Above, voices echoed from the upper dock. Rough laughter, thick accents, the clink of flasks passing back and forth. He climbed silently, staying in shadow. Two men leaned against a rusted winch, smoke curling around them like mist. "I heard Koopmans is bringing in a full hold of Dreamlily tomorrow," one said. "Straight from the Silver Coast, untouched." "Untouched?" the other scoffed. "Nothing in this town stays untouched, not with Van Horn's men sniffing around it. No, this one's locked down. Full guard. Koopmans himself overseeing the unload. You know what that means." The first man grinned. "Means it's worth more than we'll ever see. One vial of that stuff can make a man forget his name. A crate? That's Empire's." A third voice joined from deeper in the fog. "Means someone's about to get rich. Or dead." They laughed, moved on, faded into mist. Darkwater stayed crouched in the shadows, still as stone. Koopmans. Dreamlily. Propaganda. Framed murder. This wasn't chaos. It was architecture. This wasn't just about power. It was about narrative, about control. Someone wasn't hunting him. Someone was rewriting him. "There it is," Drevar whispered. "Now you see it." Darkwater stood tall in the fog. His breath steamed through the mask. His wounds ached, but the fire in his chest had nothing to do with pain now. He turned from the sea and walked toward the trap, not to spring it, but to set his own. The docks were quiet in the way graveyards are quiet, lanterns swaying on iron hooks, the scent of brine sharp enough to sting the eyes. Crates stacked like tombstones. Chains clinked softly in the wind. Darkwater watched from the shadows, perched on the roof of an abandoned boathouse. His wounds had sealed. His body was whole again, but his breath still dragged like smoke. His limbs still ached with the weight of restraint. Below, 6 men moved through the gloom, armed, silent, too precise to be dockhands. They weren't guarding cargo. They were waiting. 6, Drevar whispered, amused. He sent 6. For you. Darkwater said nothing. Then, from the far side of the dock, another figure emerged. Koopmans, sharp suit, immaculate posture, hands behind his back like an admiral watching a tide roll in. He wasn't giving orders. He didn't need to. Darkwater dropped soundlessly to the crates. He didn't wait. He moved. The first man never saw him, just a blur and darkness. Bone cracked against stone, a muffled gasp. The second turned just in time to take an elbow to the throat. Then the third shouted, too loud. Lanterns flared. Boots thudded. The fight erupted like a struck match. Darkwater became motion, non-lethal strikes, disarms, joints shattered instead of throats crushed. He could kill them, easily, but he didn't. He refused. And that's what slowed him. A cry rang out beyond the fight. It's him! Townsfolk. A half dozen at first, then more. Dockworkers, fishmongers, local boys with tools clutched in trembling hands. He's the one who killed that girl. The first bottle shattered near Darkwater's feet, flame bursting out across the dock. The crowd surged, not trained, not skilled, but full of belief. Belief that he was the monster, not Koopman's. Darkwater backed up, deflecting a wild swing from a dockhand's rusted hook. Stop! He barked. I'm not your enemy. They didn't hear him, or they didn't care. Beneath his coat, something shifted. Something moved. Dark tendrils, black as the ocean floor, slick with shadow, slithered beneath the fabric. They twitched like they could taste the blood in the air. One coiled around his leg. Another pressed against his ribs. Let me in, Drevar whispered, voice thick with hunger. They deserve it. Let me show them what they're trying to kill. No. He ducked a club, twisted, knocked the man out with the flat of his arm. A second attacker lunged with a chain hook. He caught it, flipped the man hard into the dock rail. More came. The tendrils pressed harder, like snakes straining against skin. Then, Koopman's moved. Quiet, precise. He stepped over a fallen dockhand, past a shattered crate, and there it was, half buried in bloodied wood and torn rope. A chain, glimmering faintly in the lantern light. He crouched, gently, almost reverently. He pulled it free, studied it, opened it. Inside, a picture of a woman and a young girl. Edges faded with time. Koopman's face didn't change. He slipped the locket into his breast pocket, buttoned it, walked away, unnoticed. Darkwater turned. Too late. He caught a flicker. Silver. Vanishing into shadow. No! A blow struck him from behind. He dropped to one knee. Vision blurred. Blood dripped from his jaw. The dock groaned under the weight of bodies pressing in. Let me in. Then it happened. A single tendril burst from beneath his coat, a black whip of shadow and fury. It cracked across the dock, sending two of the braver townsfolk flying back. The crowd screamed, some scattered. Others froze, just long enough. Darkwater staggered to his feet, but before he could vanish, a harpoon tore through the air. It struck high in his back with a wet, meaty sound, steel punching through flesh and bone. The force knocked him off the dock. He hit the water like dead weight. No splash, just silence. The townsfolk rushed to the edge, peered into the dark. Bubbles rose, then nothing. The harpoon rope slithered after him, vanishing into the depths. They waited, they watched. But Saltmarsh's harbor, greedy and black, gave nothing back. He was falling, but there was no water, no impact, just cold. Then, silence. Darkwater opened his eyes to a world with no sky, no floor, only depth. An endless, formless sea of black, threaded with glimmers of light that flickered like drowned stars. No horizon, no gravity, only pressure, only weight. The wound in his back was gone, his coat dry, his body whole. But he felt it, the wrongness, This wasn't Saltmarsh. This was the space behind all things. A low sound filled the void, not heard, felt. Like the groan of old timber beneath an ocean's crush, like memory bleeding. And then it appeared. Drevar. Not a figure, not a face, a shape, a sphere of absence. Perfect. Wrong. A hole in reality, blacker than blindness, blacker than death. Void tentacles unfurled from its surface, writhing through the air like they were reaching for something they could never touch. No light reflected off it. No sound echoed near it. It was absence given shape, and it was watching. There you are, the voice said. Not from the void, from inside his skull. Smooth, seductive, inescapable. He stood still. He didn't answer. The void pulsed, amused. You broke. Tentacles slid outward, one brushing his coat, another curling near his ankle but never touching. The temperature dropped, and with it came a memory. Fire, screams. The first deal struck. You let them beat you. You let them steal her from you. The locket, her. A tendril peeled away from Drevar, hissing into form. It unfurled a vision into the air. The locket, it hovered, glimmering, beckoning. Darkwater reached for it, and it burned him. He hissed, pulled back. Not yet, Drevar whispered. You're still pretending. The locket vanished. Darkwater took a step back. Let me in, Drevar said again. Let me make you complete. I'm not yours. You were mine the moment you begged for a second chance. The void pulsed. Reality rippled like a curtain underwater. A tentacle lashed out, fast, then froze an inch from his throat. It didn't strike. It waited. You fear becoming me, but you're not becoming anything. Just a whisper, a myth they mock. Let me give you truth. Darkwater clenched his fists. I made a promise, he said. To her, I'd be something better. The void shivered. A tendril curled around his ankle. Another hovered above his back like a spider's leg. Then, slowly, deliberately, they receded. You forget, Drevar said, calm as rot. You are bound to me. You breathe because I allow it. And whether you fight or not, the void pulsed. Darkwater felt it. The hunger, gnawing at the edges of his soul like rats beneath the floorboards. I will feed. A sound like pressure cracking stone echoed through the void. Reality bent inward. Now go, little ghost. Drift, bleed, crawl through their world again. Darkwater's knees buckled. The abyss cracked, and Drevar threw him. He hit the dark like a body tossed into surf. The skiff moved silently across the black water, pushed by nothing but the current, and a man's need to disappear. Koopman sat at the bow, still immaculate, though the fog clung to his coat like ash. His gloves were folded in his lap. In one bare hand, something small and silver. The locket. He hadn't looked at it since the docks. Now he turned it over in his fingers, opened it, studied the faces inside with a cold, unreadable calm. The skiff bumped against the shore with a hollow thunk. He stepped off without hesitation. This coastline was different, feral. Twisted mangrove roots, pale reeds that hissed in the breeze. The air smelled of salt, sulfur, and herbs that had no name. A shack waited just beyond the tide line. Wood bleached grey by time. No windows, only charms hanging from the eaves. Bones, feathers, coins warped by fire. Things that whispered when the wind touched them. He knocked once. No answer. He stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a ring of candles, each flame a different hue. Blue, green, violet, one that hurt to look at. She sat cross-legged in the center, behind a table carved from driftwood and bone. She looked like the tide made flesh, Caribbean blood in her bones, stormwater in her eyes, hair coiled like rope, streaked with salt. Her gaze met his, unblinking. "You brought me something," she said. Her voice was low, rich, not a question, a statement. Koopmans held out the locket. She didn't take it. "Not yet. You don't know what you're asking," she said. "I know enough," he replied. She tilted her head. "You think he's just a man wearing guilt like a mask?" He said nothing. "You're wrong," she said. Still, he said nothing. Finally, she reached out and took the locket. The moment her fingers closed around it, the flames in the room bent sideways, not flickered, bent, as if gravity itself bowed. She inhaled sharply, as if she'd tasted something bitter. "His soul is tethered," she said, "knotted to something that was never meant to walk this world." Koopmans raised an eyebrow, but his voice was steady. "Can he be destroyed?" The witch looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "But he can be undone." She placed the locket on the table, draped her fingers over it. "You'll need blood, old blood, and a weapon wielding even older magic." Koopmans didn't flinch. "I'll bring both," he said. She smiled then, not kindly. If this one stirred something in you, drop a comment. I'd love to know what you think really happened, and who you think deserves the blame for all the death in Saltmarsh. The Abernathy Files, Episode 5, Wolves and Warnings. Sometimes the monsters that chase us aren't strangers. They're our parents, our teachers, our roots. In Wolves and Warnings, Peggy and Nancy are neck deep in it now, chased, tested, cornered. This story is about inherited trauma dressed up as folklore. It's about the wolves that wear human faces, and the women who refuse to be prey. If you've been waiting to see the Abernathy legacy push back, this is the moment. Just know, in this town, every warning is earned.
Nancy lay sprawled at the bottom of the moss-choked pit, her breath coming in ragged clouds as the cold bit into her skin. Her ribs ached from the fall, but it wasn't the pain that froze her. It was the things surrounding her. The silence in the pit was unnatural, smothering. Around her, jagged roots curled like claws from the earth, and tangled among them were bones, some animal, some terrifyingly human. The growls began again, low and layered, echoing from every direction. From the dark corners of the pit, shapes emerged. They were wolves, or had been once. Now they were something else entirely. Their bodies were ruined, skeletal things stitched from bone and sinew, their fur long rotted away. Shadow clung to them like a second skin, pouring from their jaws and ribs, forming muscles where flesh should be. Their empty sockets glowed with pale blue-white light, like distant stars burning with cold hunger. Nancy's hands trembled as she tried to sit up. The wolves didn't charge. They circled, watching, waiting. Then the mist thickened, rolling into the pit like smoke from some ancient fire, and her vision twisted. Suddenly, she was 8 years old again, standing on the linoleum floor of a too-bright hospital. Her mother, in her nurse's uniform, stethoscope hanging forgotten around her neck, stood across the lobby, purse over one shoulder, her eyes fixed somewhere just past Nancy. "Stay quiet. I'm on shift. Don't touch anything. Don't make a mess." The words were like ghostly echoes, but they hit Nancy with the weight of memory. She remembered waiting alone in the back hallway of the hospital, playing with tongue depressors and scribbling with stolen pens, hoping her mother might look back. She never did. And now, as Nancy stared, the mist twisted again, and her mother's eyes flared yellow, her lips pulling back to reveal sharp, glistening teeth. The nurse's uniform split like paper as fur burst through, limbs lengthening. A wolf now stood in her place, its fur matted, its glare accusing. A new vision unfurled. She was 10, seated in an oversized desk at school, while muffled voices echoed behind the classroom door. Her teacher and the principal whispered about her temper, her isolation, her trouble adjusting. The door cracked open just enough for their faces to turn, and as they looked directly at her, their mouths stretched into snarls. Their skin fell away in strips, revealing grinning bone and black fog beneath. More wolves slinked forward. Nancy flinched. Another figure stepped forward from the fog. Her father. Tall, stern. He wore the scowl he always saved for her. In this vision, it was the night he'd come home from her 6th grade parent-teacher conference. He held her crumpled report card in his hand. "C in math," he muttered. "A waste of your mother's sacrifice." Nancy sat on the couch, back straight, hands folded, as if perfect posture could earn forgiveness. But it never did, and just like her mother, his face began to ripple. His mouth split wide, his arms stretched unnaturally. Another wolf emerged, sleek, powerful, and cold. Nancy tried to crawl back, but the pit walls offered no escape. A 4th shape approached. It moved slower than the others, heavier. Nancy knew it before the mist cleared. The funeral home, the stale perfume, the suffocating hush of a crowd pretending grief. She was 16 again, standing beside the casket, her mother inside, her father beside her, not comforting, never comforting. She wouldn't have died if it wasn't for you. The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, but they carried more force than any blow. Nancy didn't understand them then. She still didn't. But in this place, they stuck in her chest like a knife. As her father turned toward her, his features crumbled and reformed, and another wolf stepped forward. This one older, its muzzle scarred, its growl filled with ancient judgment. Surrounded, Nancy clutched at the dirt, her breath short and frantic. The wolves circled closer, not with speed, but with slow inevitability. The mist clung to her skin, thick and suffocating. Her past had come alive around her, not as memories, but as monsters, and there was nowhere to run. Then, a voice, sharp, real, Peggy's voice. "Nancy, look at me." A beam of light sliced through the fog, and a figure appeared at the edge of the pit, mud-smeared, wild-eyed, revolver in one hand, flashlight in the other. "Grab a hold of me." Nancy didn't move, couldn't. The wolves were too close now, pressing into the space between vision and flesh. Peggy didn't wait. She dropped the flashlight, slid down the wall, and reached Nancy, yanking her out of the circle of bones with a strength born of pure, furious defiance. She wrapped one arm around Nancy's waist and half dragged, half climbed back up the pit wall, slipping but always continuing as roots tore at her coat. They hit the surface with a gasp. Nancy collapsed against her, shaking. Her hands clawed at Peggy's coat like she might fall back into the earth if she let go. Peggy held her close, voice low and fierce, one hand cradling the back of Nancy's head, the other gripping her shoulder like she was anchoring her to the world. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're out. You're safe now. I've got you." Nancy shuddered against her, eyes wide. "But we need to go. Now. Those things are still coming." "I swear," Peggy growled, "if any undead wolf even breathes in your direction, I'll plant a boot up its hollow ass." A broken laugh escaped Nancy's throat, half hysterical, half grateful. Peggy slipped an arm around her. We run together. You fall. I pick you up. You panic. I slap you out of it. You see another vision. You scream and I shoot it until it runs away. Got it? Nancy nodded shakily. Got it. Good. Peggy adjusted her grip on the revolver and glanced down the deer path. The mist hadn't thickened yet, but the cold was rising again. Let's get the hell out of this nightmare. Peggy and Nancy crashed through the underbrush, branches slashing at their arms, breath ragged in the freezing night air. Behind them, the forest pulsed with growls and movement, not the chaotic rush of predators in chase, but the patient, inevitable advance of something that knew it would catch them. Their boots hit gravel. The sudden change in terrain shocked Peggy's legs. They staggered out of the tree line and onto a narrow, unlit stretch of county road, their shadows spilling long in the moonlight. Keep moving, Peggy barked, hauling Nancy forward. Nancy looked back. Her scream caught in her throat. The wolves had reached the edge of the trees and stopped. A dozen shapes emerged from the woods, bone and shadow braided into monstrous forms. Their hollow eyes burned with blue-white fire as they gathered along the tree line, silent and waiting, like judgment made flesh. None stepped forward. Peggy slowed, heart thundering, watching them. Why aren't they crossing? The wolves growled, low and layered, like a language half-remembered. One raised its snout, testing the air. Nancy turned, pointing. Look. Just to the right of the road, half buried in vines and rust, a crooked metal sign jutted from the weeds. Welcome to Millbrook. A bullet hole pierced one of the O's. The whole thing leaned like it was trying to collapse. They're not just waiting, Peggy said. They're deciding. And then one of the wolves stepped forward. The moment shattered. More followed, shadow trailing from their paws as they crossed onto the pavement. Headlights exploded over the hill. Peggy barely had time to shove Nancy aside as a pickup truck barreled around the bend, its tires screeching in protest. The driver saw the wolves too late. The impact was sickening. Two of the nearest wolves went flying, bone and mist scattering across the asphalt. The truck swerved, tires blowing as it crashed into a ditch with a metallic crunch. The engine hissed but didn't die. The driver stumbled out, a middle-aged man in flannel, dazed and bleeding from the forehead. Jesus Christ, he gasped. What the hell was that? Run, Peggy screamed. You have to run. But it was too late. The remaining wolves were already circling. The two the truck had hit began to reform on the road, bones snapping into place, shadows knitting flesh. Nancy snatched the revolver from Peggy's coat pocket and fired. The nearest wolf's skull burst apart, but the creature didn't fall. It just staggered, then began to pull itself back together, blue light sparking from the cracks in its skull. I'm out, Nancy cried, fumbling with the empty weapon. The man screamed as the wolves closed in. Peggy grabbed Nancy's wrist, yanking her away. We can't save him. We have to go. But now. The last thing Nancy saw as they vanished into the woods again was the wolves surrounding the man, their shadows swallowing him whole. They continued through the countryside, branches slashing, frost crunching beneath their boots, breath ripping from their lungs like smoke. Behind them, the road was silent. The man's screams had stopped. Peggy didn't slow until the trees grew familiar, until Millbrook's distant streetlights shimmered through the branches like stars barely holding back the dark. Nancy stumbled beside her, eyes hollow, lips bloodless. Neither of them spoke, because they both knew a line had been crossed. Millbrook wasn't the quiet town they'd always thought. The Abernathy house was still, but the living room light was on. It had that feel that only came when people were wide awake and waiting. Despite Peggy's best efforts, the back door creaked when she crept through it, her boots caked in mud, coat torn and hands trembling. The screen door snapped shut behind her like a gunshot. Margaret Ann Abernathy. Her mother's voice cut through the silence like a whip. A light clicked on in the hallway, illuminating her father in his robe, his face twisted in a storm of anger and worry. Her mother appeared behind him, arms crossed, hair in curlers. "Where the hell have you been?" her father demanded, stepping forward. "Do you know what time it is? It's nearly 1 a.m. "You didn't leave a note. You didn't call," her mother added sharply. "We were about to call the police." Peggy winced, not just at their words, but at how ragged she knew she must look. Her hair was wild, face streaked with dirt, and her jacket was scuffed and torn at the sleeve. I went for a walk," Peggy said, reaching for the simplest lie that might still sound reasonable. "I needed some air. I lost track of time." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe that? You come stumbling in here looking like you've been in a bar fight, and you want us to believe you went for a walk?" "I was walking in the woods," Peggy muttered, brushing past them toward the stairs. "I got turned around. Then I fell. I'm fine, just tired." "You are not fine," her mother snapped. "Something is going on with you, and we are not stupid. You've been acting strange for weeks now, since Halloween. You disappear at all hours, you come back looking like this, and now you won't even tell us the truth." Peggy's chest tightened. The lies tasted bitter, and guilt burned coldly beneath her skin. "I'm just tired," she repeated softly. "Can we do this in the morning? Please." Her parents stared at her. The hallway light hummed in the silence. Her mother opened her mouth again, but her father raised a hand. "Go to bed. But tomorrow, we're talking. All of this. No more running around at all hours. No more secrets." Peggy nodded mutely, already halfway up the stairs. Her legs trembled with each step, and when she finally reached her room and closed the door, she pressed her forehead against it, exhaling a breath that shook. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the glass in the window panes. She crossed to her desk and turned on the lamp, its soft yellow glow pooling over the ancient book that waited there, the one the old woman had given her. The cover was worn, its corners cracked. The sigils on the spine pulsed faintly. Or maybe that was just her eyes playing tricks in the low light. She didn't open it. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, coat still on, eyes fixed on a shadow in the corner. What was she going to tell them? The next morning, light crept through Peggy's curtains in gray, reluctant streaks. Her body ached like it had been dragged through gravel, and in a way, it had. She lay still, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was loaded like the pause before a trap is sprung. Downstairs, she heard movement. No clinking dishes, no music, just low voices and the occasional sharp word. They were talking about her. She sat up slowly, every joint resisting. Her coat still lay in a crumpled heap on the chair, mud flaking from its hem. Her boots sat by the door like evidence waiting to be bagged. She dressed quickly. Jeans, jacket, a clean shirt that didn't look suspicious. She slipped across the floor, avoiding the third step. It always groaned. In the kitchen, a bowl of oatmeal sat untouched on the table. A passive-aggressive olive branch. Or a trap. She ignored it. At the back door, she hesitated, then scribbled a note. Went to the library. Be back by lunch. Just plausible enough. She slipped out. The cold hit like a slap, sharper in daylight, more alert. Frost still clung to the grass. Her breath came in tight clouds. Nancy was already waiting by the old train bridge, arms folded, knit cap pulled low. She looked tired, haunted but whole. When she saw Peggy, she gave a tight smile that didn't seem sincere. "You okay?" Nancy asked. "No," Peggy said honestly. "You?" "Nope," Nancy said. "But I'm here." They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Just walking side by side was enough. They both understood that some things follow you after a night like that. Things you can't name, can't shake. Peggy glanced over. "I need to show you something. Everything. I should have done it sooner." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Is this where you drag me to your secret hideout and tell me the town's full of demons?" "Yeah," Peggy said. "Basically." Nancy sighed and started walking. "Okay, lead the way." The alley behind Garrett's bookshop was quiet, choked with frost and the musty scent of wet leaves. Peggy crouched beside the old milk crate she kept stashed behind the dumpster, wiping her palm against her jeans before gripping the edge of the window. "This," Nancy whispered, glancing around, "feels like the part in a horror movie where the audience starts yelling at the screen." "Yeah, well," Peggy grunted, hoisting the window open. "The audience doesn't usually have to deal with undead shadow wolves." She climbed through first, boots scraping against the shelf beneath the window. Once inside, she reached back through the opening. "Come on." Nancy hesitated, eyeing the window like it might bite her. "You said you wanted answers," Peggy added. Nancy sighed and climbed in, nearly knocking over a stack of outdated astrology manuals. Peggy steadied her. "Classy," Nancy muttered. "So this is your secret lair?" "No," Peggy said, flicking on her flashlight. "That's downstairs." Nancy blinked. "There's a basement?" "Yep, hidden one, behind the history section." "Of course there is." The building groaned as they moved. Above them, the shop's main floor sat silent, still shuttered, still technically closed, since Mr. Garrett had disappeared. But the air didn't feel empty. Nancy slowed. "You've been coming in here a lot, haven't you?" "Yeah," Peggy said. "Last couple of weeks." Nancy stopped walking. "Peg, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Peggy didn't answer. She just pulled aside a moldy curtain, revealing a trap door. She flipped the switch. A low golden light flickered on below, illuminating a narrow staircase of warped brick and groaning wood. "Look," Peggy said. "I didn't think you were ready." Nancy gave a bitter laugh. "Ready? For what?" They reached the bottom step. The air shifted. The candles lit themselves, and the shadows moved. Nancy froze, hand gripping the banister. "Did you do that?" "Nope," Peggy said, calm but tense. The basement smelled of earth and old paper. Along the stone walls, dozens of candles burned with unnatural stillness. The space stretched wider than it should have, arched ceilings, crooked alcoves, chalk lines on the floor, worn sigils, ritual circles long faded. Something stirred at the far end of the room, a shadow too thick for candlelight. It reformed into the outline of a man, or the memory of one. His form flickered like a reel of old film caught between frames. His face was obscured, but the air bent around him with weight. Nancy stepped back. "Peggy, what the hell is that?" "The Guardian," Peggy whispered. "He shows up every time I come down here." The spirit's voice rumbled from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You should not be here." Nancy flinched. Peggy stepped forward. "She's with me. She has a right to know." The air thickened. The candles dimmed. "I have warned you once," the voice said. "This path is not meant for you." "And I told you," Peggy said sharply. "I'm doing this." She raised her chin and recited the phrase Mr. Garrett had given her. "In the silence where shadows dwell, bind the light to break the spell." Silence fell like a hammer. The ghost didn't move, then suddenly it did. Not forward, but closer. One blink, and it was just inches from Peggy, towering and massive, made of memory, force, and fury. "Blood will answer for what has been stirred," it hissed, "and blood will pay the price." Nancy gasped. Peggy's jaw clenched. "Then it'll be my blood, not hers." For a moment, nothing. Then the ghost flickered, cracked, just slightly. The voice returned, softer, tired. "You should have stayed away." "I know," Peggy said, "but something's coming, and you know it." The weight in the air shifted, and then, just like that, the spirit was gone. The candles burned steady once more. Nancy stared at the empty space where the ghost had vanished. Her voice came low, dry. "Okay, you've got maybe 10 seconds to explain before I start screaming or crying. Possibly both." Peggy didn't flinch. She reached for a battered notebook on a nearby crate and handed it over. The pages were filled with ink, clippings, diagrams, chaos that somehow formed a map. "This town," Peggy said quietly, "is wrong. Not just haunted, cursed. There's something underneath it, always has been, something rotten, and someone always had to keep it in check." Nancy flipped through the pages. Symbols like teeth. Places marked in red. Old names. Burned edges. "Like a monster hunter thing?" she asked. "More like janitor of the supernatural. I think Garrett was part of a cult that summoned the fog back on Halloween before he vanished. I think he was trying to make it right. I think he wanted me to finish what he started." Nancy gave a humorless chuckle. "Figures. You always did have a thing for weird books." "Yeah, well, this one bites back." Peggy moved to a nearby candle and watched the flame flicker. "Since Halloween, it's been getting worse. Shadows moving the wrong way. The fog that took people. Took Tom." Her voice caught in her throat. Nancy hugged the notebook. "They knew me. Or pretended to, like they were made of my memories." Peggy nodded. "They are. I think they're built from trauma, regret, fear. They twist what's already inside you." Nancy stared at the chalk-lined floor. "And that ghost?" Peggy shook her head. "I don't know who he is. Garrett said he was a guardian spirit, but he doesn't like me being here. Hates it, actually. But I say that phrase, and he backs off." Nancy looked at the dark far wall. He didn't seem evil. No, just old, worn down, like he's waiting for something. Nancy exhaled. "Okay, if we're really going demon hunting, I'm going to need a stiff drink." Peggy pointed to a dusty shelf. "Luckily, there's a wine rack." Nancy stared. "Of course there is." She pulled a bottle with a smudged label. "This looks older than your basement." "Perfect," Peggy muttered. "We'll toast if we survive." Nancy plopped down beside her, flipping open a dusty volume. "So, what now?" Peggy pulled out the Polaroids they took the night before, photos of the carved stone deep in the woods. "We figure out what this is. The wolves came from that place. Whatever binds them is tied to it." They worked in silence, pages rustling, ink smudging. Outside, the wind howled, or maybe it didn't. Several hours and half a bottle of wine later. I think I found something, Peggy said, tapping a page. Nancy leaned in. There's a ritual, a severing spell. Old, fragmented. It's meant to break the bond between fear demons and the vessels they ride. But the reversal chant, it's not in English. She looked up. But it's the best shot we've got. Nancy closed her book with a snap. Let's do it. Peggy arched an eyebrow. No sarcasm? I'm too tired, and I'd like to sleep without ghost wolves licking my trauma. Peggy smirked. Fair. Her finger drifted to the bottom of the page. Just below the chant was a faded line. Something must be given. She didn't read it out loud. Instead, Peggy glanced at the clock. Her stomach twisted. Shit. I told my parents I'd be back by lunch. Nancy paused. That's not ideal. They're already suspicious, Peggy muttered. If I don't show up soon, it's going to be a full meltdown. Police, grounding, apocalypse. Nancy frowned for half a second. Then her eyes lit up. Wait, we've got Mr. Garrett's stash, the cash box from the back room, right? The one with the bonds and cash and everything? Peggy blinked. Yeah. Why? No one knows Garrett is missing yet. As far as your parents are concerned, you got a job. Quiet hours, inventory, archiving, whatever sounds old and boring enough that they won't ask questions. Peggy stared at her. You think they'll buy that? It's Millbrook, Nancy said, standing up. Everyone probably thinks Garrett is just on one of his weird antique-buying road trips. He always kept to himself. And if you walk in with dust on your jacket and a story about helping the old man organize his old books and tax receipts, sounds boring, sounds real. Peggy exhaled. God, I love your brain. Nancy smirked. You're welcome. Now go lie to your parents so we can go banish some nightmare wolves later. Peggy grabbed her coat. On it. Nancy nodded, already gathering the books. I'll keep digging. If anything starts glowing or growling, I'll scream. Deal. Peggy hesitated at the basement stairs, then turned back. Thanks for covering for me. Don't get all sentimental, Nancy said. Just make it convincing. The afternoon passed in uneasy silence. Peggy didn't linger at home. She scrubbed away the dirt just enough to look believable and delivered the carefully practiced lines about archival duties and sorting through Mr. Garrett's special filing system. Every word felt bitter, like swallowing something sharp. Her mother's eyes narrowed, skeptical and searching, and her father's silence cut deeper than outright disbelief ever could. It wasn't just that she hated lying. It was that the lies worked. They nodded slowly, cautious relief overriding suspicion, accepting the half-truth because it was safer than confronting the alternative. Peggy left before their fragile acceptance could shatter, guilt twisting cold in her gut. But for now, they believed her. The back window creaked open just after sunset. Peggy slid through, landing with a thud that rattled a stack of books. Her coat was different, cleaner, but her face still carried the weight of the day. She clutched the Latin dictionary under one arm and exhaled a slow breath as the cold followed her in. Nancy, she called softly. A muffled, "Back here," echoed from the basement stairwell. Peggy followed the candlelight, her boots tapping a steady rhythm across the warped floorboards. The air in the basement felt heavier than before, like the shadows were leaning in. Nancy sat cross-legged on the stone floor, surrounded by open books, notes, and a new uncorked bottle of wine. "You look alive," she said. "Barely." Peggy held up the dictionary like a sword. "But I got it, and I think we're ready." Nancy stood, brushing off her knees. "Good." Because I'm getting restless." Peggy nodded. "Then let's not wait." They moved quickly, gathering what they needed: salt from the ritual shelf, a cracked bottle of iron filings, the parchment filled with arcane symbols into Nancy's coat. Peggy added the notebook and the Latin dictionary to her bag, then paused, her fingers brushing the page with the phonetically spelled incantation. "Got everything?" Nancy asked, slinging her flashlight over one shoulder. "Yeah," Peggy said, quieter now. "Let's finish this." They slipped out the back, boots crunching over frost-bitten leaves. The town behind them felt distant, too normal, too unaware. Their breath fogged the air in thick clouds as they moved into the woods, retracing steps neither of them wanted to remember. The deeper they went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of cold earth and two hearts beating too fast. The stone rose like a jagged tooth from the frozen earth, ringed in mist that never moved quite right. Peggy knelt beside it, her fingers numb as she poured a careful circle of salt. The burned ritual page crackled in the wind beside her. The sigils carved into the stone pulsed faintly, hungry. Nancy glanced toward the trees. "They're close. I can feel it." Peggy pulled out her notebook and flipped to the marked page. The chant was there, scrawled phonetically beneath the Latin. Nancy had the iron filings and parchment covered in copied symbols clutched tightly in her hands. Peggy looked at Nancy, held her gaze, nodded once. Then she began. The chant cut through the forest like a blade. The wind died. Even the stars seemed to pause. From the trees, the wolves emerged. More than before, their shapes were broken, stitched, mist and bone twisted into something other than natural. Their eyes glowed like dying stars. They didn't charge. Not yet. They watched. Nancy threw her arcane sketches into the circle. It flared, sputtering violet and blue. Peggy's voice grew louder, stronger. The stone began to hum. The forest tensed like a held breath. Then something shifted. The shadows thickened. The world tilted. And Tom stepped out of the mist. Not the Tom she remembered. Not exactly. His eyes were the same shape, same color, but glassy, empty. Hollow reflections of a boy who used to laugh in the summer rain, who held her hand under tables when no one else was looking. His flannel shirt clung to him like it had soaked in fog or regret. His lips trembled, twisted, struggling around a smile he no longer knew how to form. He reached out, fingers trembling, palm up, like asking her to dance again, like promising forever the way only the young ever could. "Peg, you left me." Peggy froze. The chant faltered, dying in her throat. She was back in that final moment, the fog wrapping around him like pale hands, Tom turning back just for a heartbeat, eyes wide, frightened, pleading. She'd reached out then, her fingertips grazing his sleeve, a fraction of an inch too short, a heartbeat too late. He'd vanished into the mist, swallowed whole, and here he was again, still standing just out of reach, not quite gone, not quite back, just trapped. "I waited," he whispered, voice cracking like dried leaves, eyes wet with tears that didn't belong in a ghost's gaze. "I was scared. I kept calling, Peg. You didn't come." Something shattered in her chest, sharp as glass and cold as frostbite. She gasped, feeling the world tear itself open inside her. Then silence. It wasn't a scream of grief or a sob of loss. It was emptiness, instant and total, like someone had reached into her soul, found every warm memory of Tom, every hidden smile, every whispered secret beneath the stars, and pulled them out by the roots. She stared at him, recognizing every detail of the face she'd loved, every feature exactly as she remembered. But now, he was nothing more than a stranger, a faded photograph, a word she no longer understood. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words were empty, meaningless. She remembered loving him, but the love itself was gone. Nancy shouted something. It sounded like her name, but it was muffled, underwater. The wolves stepped forward. Peggy dropped to her knees, eyes wide, mouth moving, but silent. The chant was forgotten. Nancy didn't hesitate. She dove for the notebook, snatched it from the frost-covered dirt, and flipped to the page. Her voice cracked on the first syllable, stumbled through the second. But she kept going. Her breath fogged the air, lips chapped and trembling as she forced each word out like it weighed 100 pounds. The stone screamed. Light burst from its cracks. Not bright, but wrong. Like color peeled from sound. The wolves shrieked in unison, echoes of every fear they were ever built from. Black fog erupted from their joints, bone rattling as their forms came undone. One by one they dissolved, until only silence remained. Peggy sat motionless, eyes blank. Nancy dropped beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Peggy, come on, say something." Peggy blinked, then again. She looked at Nancy. "Did it work?" Nancy nodded. "They're gone. You're okay." Peggy looked down at the notebook in Nancy's lap. "You finished it. You left it written phonetically. I just read it." Peggy smiled, faint, but hollow. "I saw him." Nancy didn't ask who. She just helped her up, quiet and careful, like Peggy might crack too if she moved too fast. The stone lay broken into jagged shards, faintly smoking where the cracks still glowed. Nancy knelt beside it, carefully gathering the fragments into her coat pockets. "What are you doing?" Peggy murmured. "Taking them back," Nancy said softly. "We'll store them at the bookstore, safe, just in case." Peggy nodded slowly. The mist had thinned, retreating into the trees. The wolves' den lay empty now, silent, its power spent. But they both knew better than to trust silence. Nancy adjusted her coat, now heavy with pieces of their shattered nightmare. "We should go before your folks send up a search party." Peggy nodded again, but she didn't look back. There was nothing left here for her now. As they walked through the trees, frost crackled beneath their feet like broken bones. Nancy glanced sideways. "The worst is over?" Peggy didn't answer, because she still remembered Tom's name, his face, the way his hand felt in hers. But she didn't miss him, and that hurt more than anything else.
What do you think Peggy's greatest fear really is? Would you have risked lying to your parents if you were in her shoes? And those visions, do you think the wolves showed Nancy the truth, or twisted lies she already believed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to dive into your theories. And now, the final offering. Every month I end the anthology with a story you can't find anywhere else. No teaser, no upload, no shortcut. This is April's feature, Blackroot Hollow. It's a story about bloodlines, about trespass, about rituals that were never meant to be broken, and what wakes up when they are. It's folklore soaked in vengeance, old magic sharpened into justice. This is a story for the ones who stayed, the ones who watch all the way through, The ones who understand that not every door is meant to stay closed. Welcome to Blackroot Hollow. The last whistle of football practice pierced the April air as Colton Rigsby peeled off his helmet, revealing sweat-slicked hair and a handsome face flushed with exertion. He squinted across Culbury High's field, where shadows stretched long against the red Georgia clay. Beyond the chain-link fence, two figures walked the perimeter, one with wild dark hair, the other trailing like a reluctant shadow. Colton's chest tightened with something he refused to name. There was a time, long before football, long before the Whispers, when he and Rowan had shared a treehouse behind the churchyard. But that was before her family turned strange, before his dad told him good Christians don't consort with witches. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of their cave," he called out, burying the memory beneath bravado. His teammates paused their post-practice rituals, attention shifting to the Graves siblings. "The Witch twins are out early. Must be a full moon tonight." Dwayne Tank Morrison laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. He was 6'3" of pure muscle, with a neck thicker than most people's thighs, probably collecting roadkill for their spells. His eyes darted to Colton, seeking approval, the son of the high school football legend, always searching for validation in the shadow of his father's trophies. Mason Holcomb spat into the grass, his thin face pinched with genuine fear masked as disgust. "My dad says their whole family's been weird since they settled here. Says they're the reason 3 cows went missing from the Henderson farm last year." Cody Whitaker hung back, fingers worrying the cross hanging from his neck. "They weren't doing anything, just walking." His voice was soft, almost lost in the afternoon breeze. And yet, his fingers curled tighter around the cross at his neck, as if to ward off something he didn't understand, and maybe didn't want to. "Just walking." Colton's voice hardened as he slung his gym bag over one shoulder. "They're freaks, Cody. Last week I caught Jude talking to a crow like it was answering him back." He started walking toward the fence, teammates falling in line behind him. "Hey, Graves," he called out. "You two cooking up something special tonight? Maybe some eye of newt, toe of frog?" Rowan Graves turned, 17 and fierce, her eyes flashing with something ancient in a young face. She didn't speak, just stared, and for a moment Colton felt a flutter of unease in his chest. There was something in that gaze, something that made the back of his neck prickle with a familiarity he couldn't place. Her brother Jude, 16 and perpetually hunched as if carrying invisible weight, tugged at her sleeve. "Don't," he whispered, but the word carried on the still air. "What's wrong, Jude?" Colton pressed, though the confidence in his voice wavered. "Afraid your sister might turn me into a toad? Or is that beyond your pay grade?" Tank snorted. "Maybe we should follow them home one day, see what kind of devil worship they're really up to." "I heard they danced naked under the moon," Mason added, eyes gleaming with malice and something else, a deep-seated fear instilled by Sunday sermons and whispered warnings. Rowan's lip curled. "If you followed us home, Tank, the only thing you'd see is how pathetic you look, stumbling through the woods with your mouth hanging open." Her voice was honey over broken glass, sweet but cutting. Tank's face flushed crimson as the other boys hooted. "You think you're so smart," Colton said, stepping closer to the fence. "But we know what you are." He hesitated, a flash of the treehouse, of Rowan's laugh when they were 9, before adding, "This is God's country. People like you don't belong here." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, a flicker of genuine hurt before the mask of indifference slid back into place. For a split second, Colton saw the girl who'd helped him with fractions in 4th grade before his father had found out who her family was. "Come on, Jude," she muttered, turning away. "We've got more important things to do than entertain the village idiots." As they walked away, Jude's shoulders hunched further, his eyes darting nervously to the woods beyond the school grounds. The late afternoon sun caught on something around his neck, a small charm of twisted metal and bone that gleamed dully before disappearing beneath his collar. "I'm telling you," Colton said, watching them go, "those two are up to something, and I think it's time we found out what—" Cody shifted uncomfortably, almost stepping forward before catching himself. "Maybe we should just leave them alone." He swallowed hard. It's not our business." "Why?" Colton turned, his gaze sharp. "You scared of a couple of witches, Whitaker?" "No," Cody said too quickly, his voice cracking. Because I'm not," Colton continued, silencing him with a look that brooked no argument. "And tonight, I think we should find out exactly what the Graves family does out in those woods every year." The others nodded, excitement and apprehension mingling in the air between them. None noticed how the shadows seemed to deepen around them, or how the birds had gone suddenly, unnaturally silent. At the edge of the school grounds, Rowan and Jude Graves slipped into the tree line, where the scent of pine and loam enveloped them like a familiar embrace. Only then did Rowan's shoulders relax, her fingers unclenching from fists. "They're going to follow us tonight," Jude said quietly. "I can feel it." Rowan's eyes gleamed in the dappled light. "Then they'll get exactly what they deserve." Above them, clouds scudded across the sky, revealing glimpses of the waxing moon that would rise full and heavy over Blackroot Hollow when night fell. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of something ancient and waiting. The Graves family home stood at the end of a winding dirt road, half hidden by ancient oak trees whose branches reached like arthritic fingers across the sagging roof. It wasn't dilapidated so much as defiant, a 2-story farmhouse that had weathered a century of storms and judgment, its white paint long faded to the color of old bones. Rowan pushed open the front gate, ignoring the creak that seemed to speak in tongues. Dried herbs hung from the porch rafters, swaying in the afternoon breeze. Mugwort, yarrow, and blackberry leaves strung together with red thread. To outsiders, it looked like backwoods decoration. To those who knew, it was a barrier, the first line of protection. "You shouldn't antagonize them," Jude said quietly as they climbed the porch steps. "Especially not tonight." Rowan snorted. "What would you have me do? Bow my head and say, 'Yes, sir, thank you, sir,' while they call us devil worshippers?" "No, but nothing," she cut him off, pausing at the door where a small wreath of twisted hawthorn hung. She touched it briefly, a gesture as automatic as crossing oneself in church. "I'm tired of hiding what we are, Jude, tired of pretending." Inside, the house smelled of beeswax and dried lavender, undercut with something earthier, soil and iron and time. Their mother, Diana, stood at the kitchen table, hands covered in clay as she shaped small figures. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, pulled back in a loose braid that hung to her waist. "You're late," she said, without looking up, her fingers smoothing the curve of what might have been a bird or a woman. It was hard to tell at this stage. "Granny Elsie's been asking for you." "Sorry," Jude murmured, shrugging off his backpack. "We got held up." Diana's hands stilled. "Those boys again?" Rowan moved to the sink, washing dirt from her hands with more force than necessary. "Nothing we couldn't handle." "Rowan, I know. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention. I've heard it my whole life, Mom." She turned, water dripping from her fingertips to the worn wooden floor. "But they're going to follow us tonight. I can feel it." Diana's face went still, the kind of stillness that came before lightning strikes. "Are you certain?" Jude nodded, pulling the charm from beneath his shirt, a small bundle of bones and metal, now thrumming with a faint heat. "The ward's been warming all day. Someone's got intentions toward us." Their mother wiped her hands on her apron, leaving smears of clay like dried blood. "I'll tell your father. We'll need to be careful with the boundary stones." She glanced at the window where the light was beginning to soften toward evening. "Go check on Granny. She's been restless today." Upstairs, Granny Elsie's room smelled of camphor and dried roses. The old woman sat in a rocking chair by the window, her skin so pale it was nearly translucent, blue veins mapping rivers beneath the surface. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, fixed on something beyond the glass that neither sibling could see. "Granny." Rowan knelt beside her, taking one gnarled hand in hers. "It's us." The old woman's fingers tightened suddenly, with a strength that belied her frail appearance. "They're stirring," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "The moon-eyed. They're listening again." Jude exchanged a glance with his sister. Their great-grandmother had been saying this for weeks now, but today her voice carried a new urgency. "The ritual will hold them back," he said gently, "like it always does." Granny Elsie turned toward him, her milky eyes somehow finding his face with unerring accuracy. "Not if the circle breaks. Not if blood spills wrong." Her free hand reached out, fingers tracing the air in front of Jude's face, as if mapping features only she could see. "You have more of them in you than you know, boy. More than your sister. They'll call to you when they wake." "No one's waking," Rowan said firmly, though a chill ran down her spine. "The ritual will work. It always does." The old woman's lips curled in what might have been a smile or a grimace. Such certainty in one so young. Her head tilted, as if listening to voices neither sibling could hear. "Do you remember the story I told you, about how they came to be sealed away?" "Yes, Granny," they answered in unison, the response automatic after years of repetition. "Tell me then," she commanded, her rocking chair creaking like bones. Jude began, the words practiced and solemn. "Before the settlers came, before even the Cherokee walked these hills, the moon-eyed people lived in the hollows and caves. Pale as milk," Rowan continued, "with eyes that could see in darkness but burned in sunlight. They were the first guardians of the land." "And what did they guard?" Granny prompted. "The seal," Jude said, his voice dropping. "The door beneath the mountain where the Old One sleeps." "Not a god," Rowan added, "but something older. Something hungry that would devour the world if it woke." Granny Elsie nodded, seemingly satisfied. "And when the settlers came, when our ancestors crossed the ocean with their books and bells, what happened then?" "The moon-eyed taught them the ritual," Jude said, "how to renew the seal each year when the veil grows thin. And in return, our family gave them blood," Rowan finished, "a pact sealed in sacrifice and duty." "Yes," the old woman whispered. "Blood freely given keeps the balance. Blood taken breaks it." Her fingers tightened again around Rowan's hand. "If the ritual fails, if the seal weakens further, they will return, and they will demand payment." Outside, a crow landed on the windowsill, its obsidian eyes peering into the room. Granny Elsie turned toward it, a smile creasing her face. "Tell your brothers," she said to the bird, "that tonight we honor the old ways." The crow cocked its head, then took flight with a sound like tearing silk. Downstairs, something shattered, glass breaking against hardwood. Rowan and Jude raced down to find their mother standing over the remains of a clay figurine, her face ashen. At her feet, the small statue, now recognizable as a crow, had split perfectly down the middle, revealing a core of red clay that glistened wetly in the fading light. "Mom?" Rowan's voice faltered. "What is it?" Diana looked up, her eyes wide with an emotion neither child could name. "We need to begin earlier tonight. The signs." She gestured to the broken figure. "Something's changed. The balance is already shifting." Through the kitchen window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl, a sound of warning and fear that raised goosebumps along Jude's arms. "I'll get the herbs," he said quietly. "And I'll check the boundary stones," Rowan added, already moving toward the door. Their mother nodded, kneeling to gather the broken pieces of clay. "Be quick," she said, "and be careful. Tonight, Everything watches. As Rowan stepped back onto the porch, the air seemed to press against her skin. Heavier, more attentive than before. The woods beyond their yard had gone silent, as if holding its breath. She squared her shoulders and descended the steps, refusing to show fear. Behind her, unseen, a pale face peered briefly from between the trees, eyes wide and hungry in the gathering dusk, before melting back into shadow. Jude moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, gathering jars of dried herbs from the pantry, blackroot, valerian, and juniper berries, each with its own purpose in the night to come. His fingers trembled slightly as he worked, the weight of Granny Elsie's words settling over him like a shroud. You have more of them in you than you know. He paused, catching his reflection in the window glass. Pale skin, eyes too large for his narrow face, hair the color of wet ash. Sometimes, in certain lights, he barely recognized himself. The memories surfaced unbidden. 3 weeks ago, Colton Rigsby's sneering face in the school hallway, Tank's meaty hand shoving him against a locker. Look at the little witch boy, Colton had taunted, voice pitched to carry down the corridor. Bet he turns into a bat at night and sucks blood. That's vampires, dumbass, Tank had replied, but the correction didn't stop his fist from connecting with Jude's stomach, driving the air from his lungs. Jude had doubled over, gasping, as a circle of onlookers formed, some uncomfortable, most eager for the entertainment. He'd seen Cody Whittaker on the periphery, eyes averted, shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. Then Rowan had appeared, shoving through the crowd like a storm front. Get your hands off my brother, she'd snarled, all 5'4" of her vibrating with fury. Colton had turned, lips curling. Or what, witch girl? You'll hex me. Don't push me. I could put a pox on you if I wanted to, but I don't need magic to hurt you, Rigsby. Her voice had dropped dangerously. Just need to tell everyone about what you did in the cemetery last Halloween, the real reason the headstones were knocked over. The color had drained from Colton's face. Whatever Rowan knew, or claimed to know, had been enough to make him step back, dragging Tank with him. You're dead, both of you, he'd hissed, but the threat had sounded hollow. Fucking freaks. Later, nursing bruised ribs and wounded pride, Jude had asked her what she knew about Colton and the cemetery. Nothing, Rowan had admitted with a wicked grin. But everyone's got secrets. Hit them hard enough with the possibility, and they'll fill in the blanks themselves. Now, in the gathering dusk of their kitchen, Jude wondered what secrets Colton and his friends might really be hiding. What darkness they carried that made them so afraid of the darkness in others. The back door creaked open, and Rowan slipped inside, her boots muddy, cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. Boundary stones are set, she reported, dropping a small leather pouch on the table. Inside were remnants from the perimeter, feathers, leaves, a small frog skull, each item speaking to the health of their land. But there's something off about the north corner, the hawthorn's dropping its leaves early. Their father entered from his workshop, wiping wood stain from his hands. Jacob Graves was a solid man, with calloused palms and eyes that seemed to hold more shadow than light. Unlike his wife and children, he came from ordinary stock, had married into this legacy of secrets and blood pacts, yet he wore the responsibility as if born to it. The totem's almost ready, he said, his deep voice rumbling through the kitchen. Just needs the final binding. Diana nodded, laying out white candles on the worn oak table. Rowan, did you check the moon phase? Full tonight, rising at 8:42. Rowan's fingers drummed against her thigh, a nervous habit she'd never outgrown. We should be at the circle by 8. Jude carefully packed the herbs into a deerskin pouch, his movements deliberate, focusing on the task to quiet his mind. I had that dream again last night, he said softly. The one about the door beneath the mountain. The kitchen went still, even the old refrigerator seeming to hold its hum. What happened in it? His father asked carefully. Jude tied the pouch closed with red thread, 3 knots for binding. I was walking through the woods, following something. A light, maybe, or a voice. He swallowed. I came to a clearing I've never seen before, with a stone in the center. Not like our ritual stones, older, carved with symbols I couldn't read. Diana and Jacob exchanged glances. And then, his mother prompted. The stone opened, like a door, and something reached out. He broke off, the memory making his skin crawl. Something with too many fingers. It touched my face and said my name. Not Jude, but something else. Something I couldn't remember when I woke up. Rowan moved closer, her earlier bravado dimmed by concern. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's just a dream, Jude said, not meeting her eyes. It doesn't mean anything. Dreams always mean something in this family, their father said quietly. Diana placed a hand on Jude's shoulder, her touch warm through the thin fabric of his shirt. The veil's thinning earlier this year. That's all. Your mind is picking up echoes. But her eyes, when they met her husband's, carried a different message. At the edge of town, in the parking lot behind the Piggly Wiggly, Colton leaned against his truck, watching as Tank and Mason passed a flask back and forth. The whiskey had been stolen from Mason's father's cabinet, replaced with water, a deception that would earn him a beating if discovered. So what's the plan? Tank asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. We just gonna follow them into the woods? Colton nodded, the last light of day catching on his Letterman jacket. They always do their weird shit on the night before May 1st. My dad says it's some pagan bullshit, Walpurgis night. Walpurgis? Mason snorted. Sounds made up. It's not, Cody said quietly from where he sat on the curb, his phone's glow illuminating his face in the gathering darkness. It's a real thing. I looked it up. In Europe, they believed it was when witches would gather. See? Colton gestured triumphantly. Told you they were into some satanic shit. Cody looked up, brow furrowed. It's not satanic. It's pre-Christian. There's a difference. Whatever, Professor, Tank snickered. You writing a paper or something? Cody flushed, shoving his phone into his pocket. I just think we should know what we're getting into. We're getting into teaching those freaks a lesson, Colton said, his voice hardening. They think they're so special with their weird-ass family and their holier-than-thou attitude. Rowan's not so bad, Cody murmured, almost too low to hear. She helped my sister once. Colton's head snapped toward him. What was that? Nothing, Cody backpedaled, standing up quickly. Just, what exactly are we going to do when we find them? A slow smile spread across Colton's face. We're going to expose them. Get some video of whatever sick ritual they're doing and put it online. Let everyone see what kind of freaks they really are. And if it's nothing, Cody pressed. If they're just, I don't know, having a bonfire or something. Then we make it interesting, Tank said, his grin wolfish in the dim light. Maybe scare them a little. No harm in that, right? Mason laughed, the sound sharp and mean. I brought something to help with that. He reached into his backpack, pulling out a pistol, his father's .38 revolver, the metal gleaming dully. Cody took a step back. Whoa, what the hell, Mason? Relax, Mason rolled his eyes. It's not loaded, just for show. But Colton noticed how his finger caressed the trigger with too much familiarity, how his eyes gleamed with something darker than teenage rebellion. For a moment, doubt flickered through him, a warning pulse that this might be going too far. Then he remembered Rowan's knowing smirk in the hallway, the whispers that followed his family after his mother left, the rumors that maybe the Graves family had something to do with her abandonment. The doubt hardened into resolve. Meet at the edge of Blackroot Road at 9, he said, pushing off from the truck. And Mason, leave the gun. We don't need that kind of trouble. Mason shrugged, tucking the weapon back into his bag without argument, but the gleam in his eyes remained. As they dispersed to their separate vehicles, none of them noticed the crow perched on the grocery store sign, its head tilted as if listening. None of them saw it take flight, wings cutting through the twilight like scissors through silk, bearing witness back to the woods where ancient things stirred beneath the rising moon. The forest surrounding Blackroot Hollow changed as night approached, transforming from a sunlit woodland into something primordial. Shadows stretched between trees like living things, and the underbrush rustled with movements that had nothing to do with wind. This was the hour when boundaries blurred, not quite day, not fully night, when the veil between worlds grew silk thin. Rowan stood at the edge of the clearing behind their house, watching as her father carefully removed a wooden totem from a burlap sack. It stood about 2 feet tall, carved from black walnut, into a form that suggested both human and animal features. A face with hollow eyes, shoulders that curved into what might have been wings or reaching arms, and at its base, roots that twisted like seeking tendrils. "Is it ready?" she asked, her breath fogging in the cooling air. Jacob nodded, setting the totem on a flat stone at the clearing's edge. "Just needs the final binding. Your mother's preparing it now." Rowan crouched beside the carving, not quite touching it. The wood seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, grain patterns shifting subtly when viewed from different angles. "You've outdone yourself this year, Dad." Her father's weathered face softened with rare pride. "Had a good piece of wood. This walnut came from a tree struck by lightning last summer, already touched by power." A sound from the house drew their attention. Diana emerged onto the back porch, carrying a small clay bowl. Behind her, Jude helped Granny Elsie navigate the steps, the old woman leaning heavily on both him and a gnarled walking stick carved with spiraling symbols. As they approached the clearing, Granny's steps faltered. She lifted her head, nostrils flaring like a deer scenting danger. "Something's wrong," she murmured, her cloudy eyes scanning the darkening forest. "The balance is shifting." Diana exchanged a glance with her husband. "Mother, the ritual will restore it, like always." But Granny Elsie shook her head, silver hair catching the last light. "No, child. This is different." Her gnarled fingers tightened around her walking stick. "The moon-eyed are listening tonight. I can feel them stirring beneath the mountain." A chill whispered down Rowan's spine. She'd grown up on stories of the moon-eyed people, the pale, light-sensitive beings who had dwelled in these hills long before Europeans arrived, before even the Cherokee. Beings who had retreated underground when their sacred duty was passed to Rowan's ancestors. "Granny, the moon-eyed haven't been seen in generations," Diana said gently. "Not since great-grandfather's time." The old woman's mouth set in a stubborn line. "They're still there, waiting, watching." She turned to Jude, her milky eyes somehow finding his face. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" The pull of the blood. Jude shifted uncomfortably, one hand rising unconsciously to touch the charm at his throat. I don't know what I feel." A sudden crack split the twilight, sharp as a gunshot. Everyone flinched, turning toward the sound. At the edge of the clearing, a branch had broken from an ancient oak, falling to the ground with such force that it stood upright in the soil, like a spear thrust from below. "A sign," Granny Elsie whispered. "The earth rejects what grows above." Diana stepped forward, setting the clay bowl beside the totem. "We should begin the preparations now. The moon will rise soon." As if summoned by her words, a crow swooped into the clearing, wings beating the air with frantic purpose. It landed on a low branch near Rowan, its obsidian eyes fixing on her with unnerving intelligence. "What is it?" she asked, the question automatic, a childhood habit of speaking to birds and expecting answers. The crow opened its beak and emitted a sound that was not quite natural, a series of clicks and caws that formed a pattern too deliberate to be random. Granny Elsie went still, her head tilted as if listening to words beneath the bird speech. "They're coming," she translated, her voice hollow. "4 boys with darkness in their hearts." Jacob straightened, hand going to the hunting knife at his belt. "Who's coming?" "The football boys," Jude said quietly, understanding dawning. "Colton and his friends. They must have decided to follow us after all." Diana's face hardened. "We'll need to accelerate the ritual and set wards around the perimeter." "No," Granny Elsie countered, her voice suddenly stronger. "Let them come." Everyone turned to stare at her. "Mother, we can't have outsiders interrupting the ritual," Diana protested. "Not tonight of all nights." The old woman's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "The land chooses its sacrifices, child. Always has." "Sacrifices," Rowan repeated, unease coiling in her stomach. "Granny, we don't do that anymore. The ritual just needs our blood freely given, a few drops each." "Times change, needs change." Granny Elsie tapped her walking stick against the ground 3 times, each impact sending a shudder through the soil beneath their feet. The seal weakens, the hunger grows. A strange silence fell over the clearing. Even the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of night birds, had ceased, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then, from the edge of the tree line, a rabbit burst into the open space, running in frantic circles. Its eyes rolled wildly, foam flecking its muzzle. Before anyone could react, it collapsed mid-stride, body contorting in a violent seizure before going still. Diana moved toward it, but her mother's voice stopped her. "Don't touch it," Granny Elsie warned. "Death is walking tonight." Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. In all her 17 years of participating in the Walpurgis ritual, she had never seen anything like this. "What's happening?" she whispered. "The veil isn't just thinning," her father said, voice tight with controlled fear. "It's tearing." Jude had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the spot where the rabbit had laid. "I can hear them," he murmured, almost to himself. "Voices, under the ground." Diana moved to her son, gripping his shoulders. "Jude, look at me. Whatever you're hearing, don't listen. Not yet." But Jude's eyes had taken on a strange, distant quality, as if seeing beyond the physical world. "They're calling me by that other name, the one from my dreams." "No," Diana said firmly, giving him a gentle shake. "Stay with us, Jude. We need you here." With visible effort, he pulled his attention back, blinking rapidly. "Sorry, It was like being pulled underwater." Granny Elsie nodded, unsurprised. "The blood calls to blood. It will only grow stronger as the moon rises." Jacob checked his watch, features tight with worry. "We have less than an hour before moonrise. We need to complete the preliminary rites now." Diana nodded, opening the small cloth bundle she carried. Inside were 4 white candles, a silver knife with a bone handle, and a small glass vial of what looked like oil, but caught the fading light with an iridescent shimmer. "Rowan, set the candles at the cardinal points," she instructed. "Jude, help me prepare the binding oil." As they moved to their tasks, the crow took flight again, circling the clearing once before disappearing into the darkening forest. Watching it go, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that it carried more than just news of trespassing boys. It carried a warning that tonight, for the first time in generations, the ritual might not be enough. In the distance, something howled, a sound that started as a wolf's cry, but twisted midway into something closer to human laughter. The hairs on Rowan's arms rose as she placed the final candle, a certainty settling in her bones like ice. Tonight, everything would change. Dusk surrendered fully to darkness as the Graves family moved deeper into the forest. following a path visible only to those who knew where to look. Jacob led with a lantern that cast more shadows than light, its flame protected by smoky glass. Diana followed, supporting Granny Elsie, whose steps, despite her age, had taken on a strange sureness as they ventured further into the wild woods. Rowan and Jude brought up the rear, each carrying items for the ritual. Rowan with a canvas bag containing salt, herbs, and the binding oil. Jude cradling the wooden totem wrapped in red cloth. The weight of it seemed to increase with each step, as if the carving were drinking in the night's energy, becoming more than mere wood. "Do you really think they'll come?" Jude whispered, voice barely audible above the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet. "Colton and the others?" Rowan's mouth set in a grim line. "They're stupid enough to try. And if they do, what happens then?" She glanced at her brother, catching the genuine worry in his eyes. "Then they get the scare of their lives and learn to leave us alone." But even as she said it, Rowan felt the hollowness of her confidence. Tonight felt different, charged with a potential for violence that had never been present in previous rituals. The land itself seemed to hunger, a subtle vibration running through the soil with each footfall. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached the ceremonial site, a natural clearing ringed by 7 ancient oak trees, their massive trunks twisted with age and etched with generations of symbols. At the center stood a flat stone altar, its surface worn smooth by time and use. Smaller stones marked the cardinal points, each bearing a different sigil. "Begin the circle," Diana instructed, helping Granny Elsie to a seat on a fallen log that had been positioned for her use over a decade ago. Jacob set the lantern aside and retrieved a pouch of salt from his pocket. With practiced movements, he began to trace a circle around the perimeter, the white crystals gleaming in the growing moonlight that filtered through the canopy. Rowan moved to the eastern point, kneeling to light the first white candle. As the flame caught, she whispered, "Powers of air, witness our work." A sudden breeze lifted her hair, though the surrounding forest remained still. Jude took the southern point, his hands steady as he lit the second candle. "Powers of fire, guide our purpose." The flame leapt unnaturally high for a moment before settling. At the western point, Diana lit the third candle. "Powers of water, bless our offering." Somewhere in the distance, water burbled over stones, though no stream ran near the clearing. Jacob completed the circle at the northern point. "Powers of earth, anchor our intent." The ground seemed to exhale beneath them, a subtle settling that was felt rather than heard. In the center, Granny Elsie began to hum, a low, unknown sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones rather than the ears. Her clouded eyes reflected the growing moonlight as she swayed gently on her perch. "The totem," Diana said, gesturing to Jude. He unwrapped the wooden carving and placed it on the stone altar, its features more unsettling in the dancing light of flame and moon. What had seemed merely suggestive in daylight now appeared alive, the hollow eyes seeming to watch, the twisted limbs poised as if ready to move. Diana uncorked the vial of binding oil, its scent filling the clearing, cedar and iron, earth after rain, and something older that had no name in modern language. With her index finger, she traced a symbol on the totem's forehead, the oil glistening like fresh blood. "From earth formed, by fire transformed, with water blessed, through air awakened," she intoned, her voice taking on the cadence of ritual. "Stand guardian at the threshold. Hold fast the seal. Keep closed the door." The totem seemed to drink in the oil, the wood darkening where it had been applied. Jacob stepped forward next, unsheathing the bone-handled knife. He pressed the blade to his palm and drew it across in one smooth motion, letting 7 drops of blood fall onto the totem's base. "Blood freely given to honor the pact," he said, voice steady despite the pain. "My life for the seal, my strength for the door." Diana took the knife next, repeating the action. "My wisdom for the seal, my sight for the door." Then it was Rowan's turn. She accepted the knife, its handle warm from her parents' grip. The blade bit into her flesh with surprising ease, the pain sharp but clean. She watched her blood fall onto the wood, where it disappeared as if absorbed by thirsty roots. My courage for the seal, my will for the door, she recited, the familiar words carrying new weight tonight. Finally, Jude stepped forward, his face pale in the moonlight. As he took the knife, Rowan noticed his hand trembling slightly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why he needed reassurance after years of performing this ritual. Jude nodded, drawing the blade across his palm with perhaps more force than necessary. His blood fell not in careful drops, but in a small stream, pooling on the totem's base before sinking into the wood. For a moment, Rowan could have sworn the carving's eyes gleamed red. My spirit for the seal," Jude faltered, then recovered. "My heart for the door." A shudder passed through the clearing, leaves rustling though no wind blew. The candle flames bent toward the center, as if drawn by an invisible current. Granny Elsie's humming grew louder, more insistent. She rose from her seat with unexpected grace, her walking stick striking the ground in rhythm with her voice. Moving to the altar, she placed gnarled hands on either side of the totem. "Beneath the mountain, behind the door, the old one stirs," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Hungry for light, hungry for life, hungry for freedom." She reached into the folds of her shawl and withdrew a small object wrapped in yellowed cloth. Unwrapping it revealed a stone no larger than a robin's egg, milky white with veins of what looked like silver running through it. "The key," Diana breathed, surprise evident in her voice. "Mother, we haven't used that in generations," Granny Elsie finished, "because the seal was strong, but no more." She placed the stone atop the totem's head, where it balanced precariously. "The final binding requires the key this year." The moment the stone touched the wood, a change came over the clearing. The air grew heavy, pressing against skin like water at great depth. The candle flames froze in place, neither flickering nor consuming their wax. Even the ambient sounds of the forest, the distant owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, fell silent. In that stillness, a new sound emerged, a rhythmic thumping, like a massive heart beating beneath the earth. "It's working," Jacob whispered, relief evident in his voice. "The seal is responding." But Granny Elsie shook her head, her expression grave. "No, it's resisting. The hunger has grown too strong." She turned to Diana, her milky eyes somehow sharp with urgency. "We need more. The blood freely given is not enough this year." Before Diana could respond, a new sound cut through the unnatural quiet. The crack of a branch breaking, followed by a muffled curse. All heads turned toward the edge of the clearing, where shadows moved with clumsy purpose. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, bouncing wildly as their bearers navigated the underbrush. "Told you they'd be out here doing some weird shit," came Colton's voice, too loud in the ceremonial silence. "Holy crap, are those actual witches?" Tank's deeper tone followed, a nervous laugh underlying his words. The four boys emerged from the tree line, Colton in the lead with Tank close behind. Mason hung back slightly, one hand suspiciously near his backpack. Cody trailed last, his face a mask of uncertainty, as he took in the scene before him. Well, Colton called out, false bravado in his voice. "Looks like we found ourselves a genuine satanic ritual. Should we call the sheriff or the exorcist?" The ceremonial circle seemed to contract around the Graves family, the air between them and the intruders rippling like heat over asphalt. Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between the boys and the altar. "You need to leave," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine warning rather than threat. "Now, while you still can." Colton snorted, though Rowan noticed how his eyes darted nervously to the blood on their hands, the strange totem, the frozen candle flames. Or what? You'll hex us? Yes, Granny Elsie said simply, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The land will take what is owed. A strange expression crossed Colton's face, a flicker of primal fear quickly masked by defensive anger. He turned to his friends, gesturing wildly. See, I told you they were freaks, probably killing animals out here or something. Mason stepped forward, emboldened. My dad says your whole family should have been run out of town years ago. Says you're what's wrong with this place. Diana's face hardened. Your father would do well to remember who treated his mother's cancer when the doctors gave up. Who was it that brought the poultice that drew out the poison? Mason faltered, confusion crossing his features before hardening into renewed anger. That's different. That was just herbs and stuff. The ritual is disrupted, Granny Elsie announced, ignoring the boys entirely. Her attention was fixed on the totem, where the stone key had begun to pulse with a soft white light. The balance tips, the door weakens. As if in response to her words, the ground beneath their feet trembled, a subtle vibration that grew in intensity until small stones skittered across the altar's surface. The heartbeat sound from below grew louder, faster. Cody took a step back, genuine fear crossing his face. Guys, maybe we should go. This doesn't feel right. Don't be such a pussy, Tank growled, though his own voice had risen in pitch. It's just some backwoods hocus-pocus. But Rowan saw the uncertainty in their eyes, the way their bodies instinctively angled toward escape. Even Colton, for all his bluster, kept glancing at the tree line as if measuring the distance. Last chance, she said, stepping up beside her father. Leave now, or be part of what happens next. For a moment, it seemed like they might listen, might let their fear overcome their pride. Then Mason reached into his backpack and pulled out the revolver, its metal gleaming dully in the moonlight. No, Jude whispered, horror dawning on his face. Not here, not now. But it was too late. Mason raised the gun, pointing it at the totem with a sneer that couldn't quite mask his fear. Let's see how magical this thing really is. Mason, don't! Cody lunged forward, grabbing Mason's arm and pushing it skyward. This isn't what we came for. The two boys struggled, Mason's face contorting with unexpected rage. Get off me, Whitaker. Put it down, Cody pleaded, his voice cracking. This isn't right. They're just doing their thing. They haven't hurt anybody. For a moment, something human flickered in Mason's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a flash of the boy he'd been before teenage posturing, and his father's bigotry had hardened him. Then Colton stepped forward. Let him do it, Cody, Colton ordered, though his voice lacked conviction. They're freaks. Always have been. So what? Cody shot back, still gripping Mason's arm. Being different isn't a crime. They're not devil worshippers. They're just different. They know things about plants and healing that doctors don't. Mason used the distraction to wrench his arm free, shoving Cody backward with enough force to send him stumbling into Tank, raising the gun again. My dad says they're evil, and that's good enough for me. Mason, stop! Cody scrambled to his feet, throwing himself between Mason and the totem. His back was to the Graves family, arms spread wide as if he could somehow shield them. This isn't you, man. You're not a killer. Move, Cody, Mason growled, the gun wavering slightly in his grip. No. Cody's voice was steady now, though Rowan could see the tremor in his outstretched hands. If you want to shoot that thing, you'll have to shoot me first. The clearing held its breath. Even the unnatural heartbeat beneath the earth seemed to pause. He's not worth it, Colton said finally, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder. Come on, man. Let's just go. For one terrible moment, Rowan thought Mason might shoot anyway. Might pull the trigger out of sheer spite or wounded pride. His finger tightened. Then with a sound of disgust, he lowered the gun. Fine. Whatever. Cody's shoulders sagged with relief, his breath coming in shaky gasps. The tension might have broken then, might have dissipated like morning mist, if not for what happened next. "You're dead to us, Whitaker," Mason spat, his face contorting with rage. "Freak lover." Cody stood his ground, though his voice shook. "I can live with that." Something snapped in Mason's eyes, a final tether to reason, severed. "No," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You can't." Before anyone could react, Mason raised the gun again, this time aiming directly at Cody. "Mason, don't," Colton started, reaching toward his friend. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. Cody staggered backward, a look of bewildered surprise crossing his face as his hand went to his chest. Blood bloomed through his fingers, dark against his pale blue shirt. "You shot me," he said, his voice small with disbelief. "Oh shit," Tank whispered, frozen in horror. "Oh shit, oh shit." For one terrible moment, the clearing was absolutely still, a portrait of shock and dawning horror. Then Cody's knees buckled. He fell backward, collapsing against the altar stone. His blood, bright and vital, splashed across the totem, spattering the white stone key. "What have you done?" Jacob roared, lunging toward the fallen boy. But it was too late. The damage was done, not just to Cody, whose life leaked onto sacred ground, but to something far more ancient and terrible. The totem shuddered, the wood creaking as if under enormous pressure. The keystone began to pulse with an unnatural light, drinking in Cody's blood like a parched thing finally given water. Rowan saw it all with extreme clarity. Cody's wide, frightened eyes, Mason's face draining of color as he realized what he'd done, the keystone absorbing the blood, glowing brighter with each passing second. The bullet, having passed through Cody, struck the totem just below the stone, splintering the wood with a sound like bones breaking. The clearing reeked of copper and ash, the air thick with the metallic scent of death. Cody's body lay slumped at the altar's edge, fingers still twitching as life fled him. The broken totem wept sap like amber tears, each droplet hissing when it touched the blood-soaked earth. The moon-eyed emerged not from the shadows, but from between them, from the spaces where darkness folded against itself. They moved with the liquid grace of predators who had never needed to hurry. Their silver eyes caught the moonlight and threw it back sharper, colder. Their mouths, small, childlike things, remained closed in patient anticipation. Colton tried to run. His body knew what his mind couldn't process, that boundaries had been crossed from which there was no return. He managed 3 desperate strides before pale hands materialized from the darkness, wrapping around his arms with the inexorable strength of roots cracking stone. He struggled briefly, then went limp as ancient fingers pressed against the base of his skull. They forced him to his knees before the altar, where Cody's blood soaked into the denim of his jeans. He looked up at Rowan, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Intent means nothing here," she said, her voice like flint striking steel. "Only consequence." One of the moon-eyed glided toward Diana, its movement so smooth it seemed to float above the forest floor. When it spoke, its voice bypassed the ears entirely, resonating directly in the mind. "The innocent's blood has touched the key," it said. "The old one stirs, then settles, but the seal is broken beyond simple mending." Jude stood behind the altar, his skin taking on an alabaster glow that mirrored the moon-eyed. "What does that mean for us? For the mountain?" "It means a new binding," the being intoned, "not just of blood and bone, but of memory and witness. The seal requires a sentinel, one who knows the cost of ignorance." The moon-eyed surrounding Colton moved as one, their 6-fingered hands extending toward him. He flinched, expecting violence, but what came was transformation. It began at his feet, the earth softening, roots erupting to twine around his ankles. The change crawled upward, bark replacing skin in rippling waves. His scream started human, high and terrified, before modulating into something that resonated with the ancient trees around them. His spine straightened with a series of wet cracks, elongating as his arms stretched outward, fingers splaying and hardening into gnarled branches. His face contorted in agony as his features calcified, skin hardening into twisting patterns of wood that retained just enough humanity to be recognized. Only his eyes remained unchanged, wide, wet, and terribly aware. Rowan staggered backward, bile rising in her throat. "Stop it! You're killing him!" "No," the lead moon-eyed corrected, its silver gaze dispassionate. "We are binding him. The desecrator becomes the warning. The trespasser becomes the boundary." A sound emerged from Colton's transforming throat, not words, but a sorrowful whimper that carried the essence of absolute understanding. He knew what he was becoming, what he would remain. Jude approached the half-formed totem, trembling fingers hovering inches from the wooden cheek where tears still flowed, crystallizing into sap as they fell. Is he conscious? Can he feel this? The moon-eyed tilted its head at an unnatural angle. He feels everything. That is the purpose. The warning must remember why it warns. Diana wept silently, her hands clutched to her chest. Jacob stood beside her, face etched with the grim knowledge that this was justice of a kind too ancient for human morality to encompass. When the transformation completed, Colton knelt frozen at the edge of the altar. No longer flesh, not quite wood. Something between that would neither live nor die. His eyes, still human, moved frantically within their wooden sockets, the only part of him that retained freedom of movement. Rowan approached him slowly, her shadow falling across his transformed face. She leaned close, her lips nearly touching what had once been his ear. "Remember this moment," she whispered, her voice for him alone. "When the snow falls and when the summer burns, when rain soaks your wooden skin and when drought makes you ache, remember what brought you here." She pressed her palm against his chest, where a human heart still beat beneath layers of bark. "And know that as long as you remember, the door stays closed." At dawn, the moon-eyed receded, not leaving, merely shifting their presence to a place adjacent to human perception. They would remain, watching through Colton's unblinking eyes. Tank was discovered 3 days later by hikers, or rather what remained of him was found. His body had been hollowed from within, filled with rich soil from which seedlings already sprouted. The coroner's report would cite animal attack, unable to explain how tree roots could grow through human bone in so short a time. Mason was never found at all. But sometimes, on still nights, hunters reported hearing a voice in the deepest part of the woods, always saying the same words. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." Cody was buried at the edge of the Graves family land, where wildflowers grew unnaturally vibrant around his marker. Rowan visited him often, telling him about school, about the changing seasons, about the new rituals they performed now that the old ways had shifted. And Colton remained, sentinel, sacrifice, warning. Seasons passed around him. Moss grew on his shoulders. Birds avoided him. Animals gave him wide berth, sensing the unnatural fusion of human consciousness and ancient magic. Each year on Walpurgis night, Rowan would return to the clearing. She would place her hand on his wooden chest, feeling the inhumanly slow heartbeat beneath. "The door remains closed," she would tell him. "Your vigil continues." And once, only once, she thought she felt his wooden fingers twitch against her own, the barest acknowledgement of a sentence with no end. Beneath the mountain, the old one slumbered, its hunger temporarily sated by the taste of innocent blood freely given and guilty blood forcibly taken. It dreamed of the day the sentinel would falter, when memory would fade, when new trespassers would come who did not know the stories. It could wait, It had always waited. The seal would weaken again, in time. You've reached the end, for now. If the stories sank their teeth into you, if the voices still whisper when the lights go out, you belong here, with us. Subscribe for new stories and quickfire challenges every week. Full anthology issues drop monthly. Next release, May 2025. Share with others who enjoy the dread and the fear. Stay curious. Stay terrified.